Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into the shadowy alleys of the Middle Ages, those winding streets that always smell faintly of smoke, sweat, and something you probably don't want to identify too closely. You know, the kind of atmosphere where you almost expect a hooded figure to step out with a torch and announce your sentence. And trust me, when punishments were handed out back then, it wasn't just about justice, it was about spectacle. Entire towns gathered just to watch someone pay the price, like it was the medieval version of binge-watching Netflix. Except instead of popcorn, you'd get the smell of burning flesh. Charming, right? Honestly, you wouldn't survive 5 minutes there. Your Wi-Fi signal alone would drive you mad, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there, because I love imagining this story stretching across the world at once, connecting us like little lanterns glowing in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through a cobbled square, the stones slick from rain. The air is heavy, buzzing with whispers. People are already gathering, their eyes bright with the thrill of knowing that tonight will not be ordinary. A wooden stake rises in the center of the square, its base buried in ash from countless nights before. You can smell it, charred wood mixed with something sweeter, metallic, and terribly human. This isn't just punishment. It's theater. The condemned is dragged out, wrists bound tight with rope. Their face is pale, almost luminous in the torchlight, as if already fading into ghosthood. The executioner moves with ritual precision, piling bundles of straw around the stake. It crackles faintly in the damp, waiting for flame. You can almost feel the crowd lean forward, the same way an audience holds its breath before a big reveal in a show. And then it happens. A torch touches straw, a hiss, then fire erupts. The condemned jerks, cries out, their voice swallowed by the roar of flames. The crowd gasps, some laugh, some cross themselves, and you feel your skin prickle as if the fire is licking at your own ankles. Strangely, historians still argue about why burning became such a symbolic punishment. Some claim it was about purifying the soul through fire, a cleansing ritual wrapped in agony. Others suggest it was less spiritual and more practical. Fire left little to bury, and in an age where graves could become sites of rebellion, ashes were a safer outcome. Either way, you're standing there watching, and you can't help but think, this is what passed for prime entertainment in the 14th century. Forget reality TV, this was their reality, live and unfiltered. The strangest part? Sometimes the condemned weren't even dead when the flames died down. Records mention executioners stepping in to strangle or club the half-burnt body, just to finish the job. Gruesome, yes, but also absurd in its bureaucracy, like forgetting to sign the last page of a contract. One poor soul, a supposed heretic, was reported to have survived long enough that the authorities had to relight the pyre. Imagine that. Your punishment comes with a sequel. You glance at the crowd again. Children sit on shoulders, watching wide-eyed, their future nightmares forming right here. Merchants whisper deals in the shadows, half bored because they've seen this all before. A woman drops a loaf of bread as the flames flare, her only entertainment ruined by distraction. And you shift uneasily, because part of you knows this was never really about the condemned. It was about everyone else feeling a little safer, a little holier, and maybe just a little entertained. The fire finally crackles down to embers. The air is thick, heavy with smoke that clings to your lungs. The crowd drifts away, leaving the square silent except for the occasional pop of cooling ash. You stand there, realizing that this was only the beginning. The Middle Ages had punishments for every sin, every slip, every unlucky stumble into the wrong rumor. And tonight, you're about to walk through them all step by brutal step. The square hasn't even cooled from the last fire before another kind of punishment takes the stage, one far less fiery, but, in some ways, even more humiliating. You step closer and there it is, a tall wooden post worn smooth by years of use, standing like the center prop of a grim play. This is the pillory, the town's favorite way of saying, look at this fool, and don't be like them. You hear the squeak of hinges as the wooden board swings open, revealing holes perfectly shaped for a neck and 2 wrists. It almost looks like a child's toy, except this toy bites down and doesn't let go. A poor soul is shoved forward, their arms yanked through the holes, their neck trapped tight as the board slams shut. There's a thud, a finality to it, like a lock clicking on a cage. The crowd erupts in laughter, not sympathy. To them, this isn't horror. It's comedy hour. You can feel the discomfort crawling over your skin. The condemned can't move, can't scratch an itch, can't even swat away the flies that already circle like little judges of their own. The townsfolk shuffle closer, tossing rotten vegetables. Turnips, apples, sometimes things even less pleasant. A tomato splatters against the person's face, dripping down their chin, and the crowd cheers like they're watching a slapstick show. Honestly, you think of modern talent shows where people get booed off stage, except here the reviews are edible and smell a lot worse. What makes it worse is the duration. Sometimes a few hours, sometimes days, depending on the crime. Imagine standing stock still in the summer sun or the biting winter wind, your muscles cramping, your dignity evaporating. Some records mention people collapsing from exhaustion, still stuck upright because the wooden frame refused to let them slump. A medieval chiropractor's nightmare. And yet historians debate the real purpose of this punishment. Was it just about shaming the guilty? Or was it about entertaining the innocent? Some scholars argue it was communal justice, the idea that the whole town participated in punishment. Others suggest it was simply cheap crowd control. Why pay for an execution when you can humiliate someone for free? Either way, you can't shake the thought that the pillory was less about law and more about theater. Of course, not everyone in the pillory was truly guilty. Gossip could land you there, or even being unable to pay a debt. One case tells of a man locked in for cheating at dice, only for his accuser to end up beside him the next day, when it turned out the dice were cursed. Or so the tavern swore. Picture that. Two men, heads and hands trapped, forced to glare at each other while children threw cabbage leaves at their faces. A medieval sitcom no one asked for. The most humiliating moments often came from animals. Dogs wandered up to sniff at the helpless legs of the punished, sometimes lifting a leg of their own. Chickens pecked at the crumbs of bread tossed nearby, while the condemned twitched in vain. It was humiliation layered with absurdity, as if the universe itself conspired to make them ridiculous. You stand back, watching the condemned blink through the sting of rotten fruit. Their eyes red not only from shame, but from hours of staring at the jeering crowd. And you realize the cruelty here wasn't the wood, or the food, or even the weather. It was the laughter, that sharp cutting sound that turned pain into spectacle. The crowd eventually disperses, muttering about dinner and tomorrow's chores. The condemned remains, stuck until someone official decides they've had enough. And you're left with the eerie sense that in the Middle Ages, punishment was never just about breaking the body. It was about breaking the spirit piece by piece, while everyone else went home a little more entertained. The square fades behind you, but the laughter lingers in your ears like an echo that refuses to die. You wander down a side alley, where the air grows damp and heavy, and the light seems to drain away stone by stone. Soon you're standing before an iron door sunk into the ground. It creaks open with the groan of something ancient, and you descend into the world that most people in town would never see, unless, of course, they were unlucky enough to earn a stay here. Welcome to the dungeon. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's a stew of mildew, rot, unwashed bodies, and despair so thick it clings to your tongue. The walls drip with moisture, and each step sends a ripple through puddles of foul water. You hear chains rattle in the darkness, faint moans drifting like the sighs of forgotten souls. You pull your cloak tighter, though you know it won't help. The cold here isn't just in the air. It seeps into your bones. A figure shifts in the shadows, iron shackles clamped around their ankles. Their skin looks pale, almost waxy, as though the dungeon itself has drained the color out of them. The chain rattles again, a cruel reminder that even standing up is a privilege. You imagine yourself stuck here, unable to lie flat. The only view, the same stones dripping day after day. Forget your favorite mattress. Here you'd kill just to have a dry patch of straw. The guards sometimes throw in food, if you can call it that, hard bread already growing mold, or a ladle of watery gruel that might once have seen a vegetable float by. Rats are common visitors. In fact, they might eat better than the prisoners. One story tells of a man who trained the rats to steal crumbs from other cells, making him the dungeon's first and only entrepreneur. Sadly, the rats eventually turned on him. You wince. That's one hostile takeover you don't survive. Historians still debate the true function of these underground pits. Were they primarily for holding prisoners awaiting trial, or were they punishments in themselves? Some argue they were never meant for long-term confinement, just temporary storage, like a medieval waiting room. But others point out records of people who wasted away for years below ground, their crimes forgotten, their names erased, but their chains never unlocked. Imagine being punished, not for what you did, but simply because no one remembered you were there. The strangest feature you notice is a set of wooden stocks bolted directly into the wall, as if just sitting in chains wasn't cruel enough. Prisoners would be immobilized in positions that made rest impossible, an endless torment of stiff muscles and searing joints. Sleep, when it came, was shallow, haunted, stolen in tiny fragments. You think about how many YouTube viewers fall asleep to these stories. Here, sleep was the one luxury no one could buy. Sometimes the dungeon itself seemed alive. Drips of water formed rhythms echoing like a heartbeat. Drafts whispered through cracks in the stone, carrying with them words your mind almost understood. If you let your imagination wander, you could believe the dungeon was listening, savoring each groan, each whimper like a connoisseur of misery. And if that thought makes your skin crawl, good. That means you're paying attention. You crouch to peer into one of the darker corners, where you see bones scattered like discarded toys. Some are gnawed clean, some still clothed in rags. Nobody bothered to clear them away. After all, what better warning than to share your cell with the remains of those who came before? The silence here is so deep that your own breathing feels like blasphemy. You rise again, the weight of the air pressing down on you, heavier than any chain, and you realize the dungeon wasn't just about confinement. It was about erasing people quietly, far from the jeering crowds. If the pillory broke the spirit in public, the dungeon broke the soul in private. A slow suffocation, not by rope or blade, but by time itself. When you finally climb back toward the faint glow of torchlight above, the air feels almost sweet, even with the stink of manure and smoke drifting from the streets. You never thought you'd be grateful for that smell. But compared to the dungeon, it's perfume. You emerge from the dungeon, lungs greedily gulping the smoky night air, when a different sound catches your attention. It isn't laughter this time. It's anticipation, sharp and electric, rolling through the crowd like thunder before a storm. You follow the noise to the edge of the square, where something massive looms in the torchlight. It's a wheel, bigger than any wagons, taller than a man, reinforced with iron bands. To you it looks almost theatrical, a prop from a play gone horribly wrong. But here it's not a stage trick. It's the breaking wheel. A condemned man is dragged forward, wrists bound, eyes wide with the kind of terror that makes you instinctively want to look away. But you don't. The crowd certainly doesn't. They've gathered for this like it's a festival, chattering about who brought the best ale and which angle gives the clearest view. You feel a shiver run through you as the executioner raises a heavy iron club, the kind of weapon that doesn't slice. It smashes. The first blow lands, and the man's scream fractures the night. Bones don't just break quietly. They snap, echoing against the stone walls like firecrackers. The crowd gasps, then leans in closer. With each swing, a limb is shattered, twisted grotesquely and woven between the spokes of the wheel. You watch horrified as arms and legs are bent in ways they were never meant to go, the body reshaped into a grim parody of the wheel itself. What's unsettling is how organized it all seems. This isn't chaos, it's ritual. Some chronicles even describe an order of breaking, where executioners followed a pattern. Legs first, then arms, sometimes saving the chest for last to prolong the suffering. It was disturbingly an art form, and you can't help but think, who sat down and drafted the rules for this? Some medieval committee with a very dark sense of creativity? There's debate among historians about the wheel's true purpose. Some argue it was meant to terrify, a living billboard of consequence. Others think it served as a grim equalizer. No matter how powerful you once were on the wheel, you became nothing but broken limbs and silence. And yet, there are records of certain criminals surviving for hours, even days. Their bodies grotesquely mangled, but their hearts still beating. The townsfolk would come back to gawk, dropping bread or wine at the base of the wheel as if feeding some macabre roadside attraction. A strange story lingers in the archives about one man who endured so long that the crowd began whispering he must be blessed or cursed. They begged the authorities to finish him off, terrified that his endurance was proof of a pact with the devil. Imagine that, Suffering too well could make you even more suspicious. As the night deepens, the wheel stands tall, the condemned's body draped across it like a grotesque sculpture. Torches flicker, shadows stretching the twisted limbs until they look almost inhuman. You feel your stomach twist, because the horror isn't just the pain, it's the way everyone around you treats it as a spectacle. This is entertainment, education, and execution, all rolled into one brutal display. A child nearby tugs at his mother's sleeve, pointing up at the broken figure as though asking, "Why?" The mother just shakes her head, muttering something about justice and God's will. But you notice her eyes hard, tired, and not entirely convinced. Maybe even in this age, people wondered if the punishment said more about the executioners than the condemned. When the crowd finally disperses, leaving the body lashed to the wheel overnight, you linger just a little longer. The wind whistles through the spokes, making a sound eerily like a groan. You realize it's not just the wheel breaking bones, it's breaking the boundary between punishment and performance. And in that blurred line, the Middle Ages found some of its darkest poetry. The wheel creaks in the distance as you walk away, but you know its image will follow you for the rest of the night. Ahead, under the flickering torches of a narrow hall, another device waits, simpler in appearance but no less terrifying. Two wooden rollers, a sturdy frame, ropes wound tight. At first glance, it almost looks like a medieval gym machine. Except here, the only workout is for the executioner's arms. This is the rack, the stretching table designed to test just how far a human body can go before it tears itself apart. You approach cautiously. The ropes at either end dangle with innocent quiet, but you can almost feel the tension humming inside them. A condemned man is brought forward, wrists bound, ankles shackled. He lies down on the wooden planks, face pale as the ropes are tied snugly, one set to his arms, the other to his legs. There's a moment of stillness, as though everyone is holding their breath. Then the executioner turns the handle. The first pull is almost subtle, a stretch you might feel when waking up after a long nap. You might even joke that it looks like yoga, except yoga doesn't dislocate your shoulders with a sickening pop. The prisoner groans, his body arching as the ropes tighten. Another turn of the handle, and the joints begin to separate, tendons screaming in protest. The sound isn't just in your ears. You feel it vibrate in your chest, an echo of something deeply wrong. The crowd murmurs with a mixture of fascination and horror. Some lean forward, eager to see bones shift beneath skin. Others avert their eyes, whispering prayers they hope will drown out the cries. The condemned thrashes, but the ropes only bite deeper. With every turn, his body lengthens unnaturally, like a puppet pulled too hard by its strings. Historians still argue about the rack's main purpose. Some insist it was about extracting confessions, the idea being that pain would loosen a tongue faster than persuasion. Others point out that many confessions obtained this way were worthless. People would admit to anything, even witchcraft or consorting with demons, just to make it stop. One scholar even noted that a man once confessed to sinking an entire fleet of ships single-handedly. Impressive resume, considering he couldn't even swim. The odd detail. Records suggest that sometimes prisoners weren't killed by the rack at all. They were stretched, broken, and then released, left to hobble through life as living warnings, their limbs twisted, their spines permanently curved. Imagine walking through a marketplace and seeing someone bent at impossible angles, a reminder carved into human flesh of what happens if you cross the wrong line. And then there were cases where the executioner went too far, turning the handle until ligaments snapped like bowstrings. The body couldn't take it, arms and legs pulled from their sockets, the chest heaving one last time before falling still. The silence that followed was heavier than any chain, broken only by the creak of the ropes unwinding. You stand there, feeling your own shoulders tighten, as if your body remembers something it never experienced. The rack doesn't just stretch flesh. It stretches time, each second drawn out into eternity. You think of modern gym equipment again and almost laugh, though the humor curdles instantly. Back then, personal trainers had very different goals. As the condemned lies limp on the wood, ropes slack at last, you notice the crowd already drifting away. For them, the show is over, and tomorrow will bring another. But for you, the image lingers, the body elongated, distorted, proof that in the Middle Ages, even your own anatomy could be turned against you. You step back into the cold night, the air sharp and cutting. Somewhere behind you, the rack sits silent, waiting for the next confession, The next unlucky soul, the next chance to remind the world that in this time, justice wasn't about truth. It was about control pulled taut until someone finally snapped. The night carries you onward, past the rack's eerie silence into a chamber where heat pulses like a living thing. At first you think it might be a blacksmith's workshop, tools glinting in the firelight, a furnace roaring in the corner. But then your eyes land on the centerpiece and your breath catches. It's a chair, ordinary in shape but monstrous in detail. Every inch of its seat, back and armrests is covered in iron spikes, each sharpened to a merciless point. Beneath it the coals glow red, waiting to turn discomfort into agony. Welcome to the iron chair. The guards shove a prisoner forward, their legs trembling. You can almost hear their heartbeat racing as they're forced down, body pressed onto the cruel seat. The spikes bite instantly, puncturing cloth, pricking skin. At first it's small pinches, almost like sitting on thorns, but then the executioner grins and signals. A brazier is shoved under the chair. Heat rises, turning iron from cold cruelty into a furnace of pain. The man writhes, but the straps hold him down. His skin sears where metal meets flesh, the spikes burning deeper. The smell rises, sharply metallic, almost sweet, and you wince. The crowd shifts uncomfortably this time. Less laughter, more silence. The punishment here isn't flashy. It's slow, methodical, like watching wax melt. But the candle screams. Historians still debate whether this device was used primarily for torture or execution. Some argue it was meant for interrogation, the pain wringing confessions like water from a cloth. Others suggest it was more symbolic, punishment for treason, heresy, or betrayal, crimes that supposedly required the body to be purified through fire and iron. A few even claim the chair was sometimes displayed in town squares as a warning, though whether anyone ever actually sat in it for long remains uncertain. A strange detail survives in the records. Occasionally, water or oil would be poured over the victim, not to ease suffering but to intensify it. The liquid hissed against the metal, magnifying the burn, steaming like a grotesque cooking pot. Imagine being boiled and branded at the same time, every nerve screaming betrayal. It wasn't punishment, it was theater of endurance. You can't help but draw comparisons to modern office chairs, those ergonomic thrones with lumbar support. Picture pitching this to a furniture store. The iron chair, perfect for posture. Terrible for survival. It's dark humor, but you cling to it because otherwise, the image of the prisoner squirming, skin blistering against iron, becomes too much to hold. Eventually, the victim slumps forward, strength gone. The straps keep the body in place, the spikes still embedded like cruel teeth. The executioner casually stirs the coals as if tending a meal. To him, this is routine. To you, it's unforgettable. As the chamber empties, the iron chair cools slowly, its spikes still slick with blood. The silence that follows isn't peace. It's dread, the kind that seeps into stone and lingers for centuries. You realize the cruelty here wasn't in how quickly the body broke, but in how slowly the spirit burned. You step back into the night once more, the stars overhead dim behind smoke. Each punishment you've witnessed so far has been different, but all share the same purpose, not just to destroy, but to remind, to make pain public, personal, and permanent. And you can't help but wonder, what's next on this journey through medieval justice? The firelight fades behind you, but the memory of the iron chair clings to your skin like smoke. You move deeper into the city's shadows, where another device waits. This one deceptively simple in design, but infamous in reputation. It's called the Judas cradle, though no cradle on earth has ever looked less comforting. Imagine a tall wooden frame, a pulley system above, and at the center a sharp, pyramid-shaped seat of iron. The point gleams in the torchlight, a cruel parody of a child's toy. The condemned is dragged forward, their hands bound behind their back, ropes looped through the pulley. There's no dramatic clash of steel here, just the slow, deliberate lowering of a human body onto that pointed tip. At first, it's almost absurd. You think of a circus act gone wrong, the way acrobats dangle awkwardly in midair. But as the victim's weight settles onto the pyramid, absurdity gives way to horror. The body's own weight becomes the torturer. The man gasps, muscles trembling as he's forced down, the sharp tip pressing into flesh that was never meant to bear it. There's no sudden scream like on the rack, no snap of bone like on the wheel. Instead, it's slow stretching hours or even days. Guards sometimes added weights to the legs, ensuring gravity played its part with brutal efficiency. You shift uncomfortably, realizing this wasn't just pain, it was humiliation, naked and raw, delivered in front of an audience that came not for speed, but for endurance. Historians still argue about the cradle's main function. Some claim it was used for heretics or traitors, the slow torment serving as a lesson to others. Others suggest it doubled as interrogation, the victim held aloft until their will cracked. But curiously, some accounts describe the cradle being cleaned carefully afterward, sometimes with vinegar, not out of kindness, but to sanitize the device for its next use. Medieval hygiene at its darkest. Wash, rinse, repeat. A bizarre detail survives in scattered records. Certain condemned were left suspended over the cradle for days, allowed just enough food and water to prolong their suffering. One story tells of a man who joked bitterly, calling it the longest horse ride of my life. That grim humor echoes across centuries. You almost admire it, even as your stomach turns. As you watch, you realize the cruelty here isn't just physical. It's psychological. The victim knows exactly what's happening, feels every second dragged out, every breath sharpened by pain. Unlike the flames or the wheel, the cradle doesn't just break the body. It breaks time itself, stretching moments into eternities. You can't help but smirk at the dark irony. A cradle usually rocks a baby gently to sleep. This one rocks adults into madness. Picture advertising that in a medieval catalogue. New. The Judas cradle. Rock your enemies like never before. Even your sense of humor feels guilty here, but it's all you have to soften the edges. Eventually, the victim slumps forward, no longer fighting. The crowd begins to disperse, murmuring as if they've just left a marketplace stall rather than a torture session. The cradle stands silent, its pyramid point glistening faintly in the torchlight. You step back into the cool night air, shaken but still drawn forward. Each punishment so far has been brutal, but this one leaves a deeper impression. Because it wasn't about spectacle alone, it was about endurance, humiliation, and the cruel ingenuity of turning stillness itself into torture. The night air feels fresher for a moment, almost kind after the claustrophobic horror of the Judas cradle. But then you notice the shapes on the horizon, dark skeletal frames swaying gently against the moon. At first you think they're scarecrows, guarding fields from birds. As you step closer, the metallic creak gives them away. These are iron cages, suspended from tall wooden beams dangling like grotesque ornaments. And inside? Human figures, or what's left of them. The cage is barely large enough for a person to squeeze inside. No room to sit, no room to lie down, just a standing prison that forces the body to sag against its bars. The iron presses into skin, bruising it with every shift. When the condemned is first locked inside, they might scream, they might thrash, but the cage doesn't care. It holds firm, a cruel embrace that lasts until exhaustion sets in. You tilt your head back to watch one of the cages sway. The prisoner inside groans weakly, their head lolling as the night wind rocks them like a pendulum. Below, villagers gather, pointing and whispering. By day, the sun scorches the trapped body, baking the iron until it burns to the touch. By night, cold air bites through the bars, numbing fingers and toes until they're stiff. Rain brings no relief, only chills and the sting of rust biting into skin. Historians debate whether these cages were intended to kill or merely display. Some argue the punishment was already decided before the cage, execution by starvation, exposure, or thirst, whichever came first. Others suggest the cages were more symbolic, a public reminder that justice never slept, its victims suspended above for all to see. The truth may be both, a punishment of body and reputation, where the cage itself became a billboard of shame. The strangest detail. Sometimes the cages weren't just for the living. Executed criminals were hoisted up posthumously, their corpses left to rot in plain view. Birds circled overhead, swooping in to pluck at exposed flesh. Children dared each other to run underneath, giggling as bits of bone and cloth drifted down. It wasn't just justice, it was spectacle long after the condemned had stopped breathing. One account tells of a knight who rebelled against his lord and was displayed in a cage near the castle walls. He survived nearly 4 days begging for water before finally collapsing. Locals swore his moans echoed through the valley at night, keeping farmers awake. Even after he died, the Lord refused to lower him, insisting the lesson needed more time to sink in. Imagine commuting past that every morning on your way to market. Talk about a motivational poster you can't unsee. As you stare, the cages creak in rhythm, swaying slightly with the wind. The sound is eerie, almost like a choir of rusted voices. The prisoner's eyes, hollow and resigned, stare back at you through the bars. There's no privacy here, no final dignity. Their suffering is turned into scenery, their pain woven into the skyline, and then a modern thought sneaks in. How strange, you think, that this isn't so different from today's billboards, towering above highways, demanding your attention. The difference is that medieval advertising was much more interactive and permanent. The night grows colder, and you step back from the cages, the metallic groans following you like whispers. You realize that here, punishment wasn't just about ending life. It was about erasing comfort, stripping dignity, and making sure the world never forgot. The cages weren't prisons. They were monuments of cruelty, of power, of control. The creaking of the cages fades into the night, but the sound of voices grows again, this time lighter, almost festive. You follow the noise back toward the square, where torches flare and villagers gather. Not for a market, not for a feast, but for another kind of show. At the center stands a stout wooden post, already stained dark from years of use. A whip coils in the hand of the executioner, like a serpent waiting to strike. Tonight it's flogging, punishment through lashes as public as it is painful. The condemned is dragged forward, shirt ripped open, back exposed to the cold air. They're tied to the post, arms stretched, skin pale in the torchlight. You can almost feel the hush ripple through the crowd. This isn't the silent dread of the dungeon or the iron chair. This is entertainment. Parents hoist children onto shoulders, merchants lean on their carts, and even the baker has stepped away from his ovens. Everyone wants a front row seat. The whip cracks through the air before it touches flesh, a sound sharp enough to make you flinch, and then it lands, tearing skin open in a red line. The victim jerks, a cry torn from their throat. The crowd reacts instantly. Some cheer, some laugh, others wince as if they felt the lash themselves. The executioner pauses just long enough for the anticipation to build again. Then another crack, another line carved into the back as neat as calligraphy. Historians still argue about how many lashes were typical. Some records say a dozen was standard. Others speak of 40 or more, depending on the crime. Debts, theft, gossip, even breaking minor laws could earn you a whipping. It was the Swiss Army knife of punishments, painful, visible, and relatively cheap. You can't help but compare it to modern community service. Except here, the service was providing the community with free entertainment. And yet, it wasn't always lethal. Sometimes the punishment was as much about humiliation as pain. The victim's back might heal, but the memory of standing half naked in front of neighbors, squirming under their gaze, never quite faded. One chronicler even noted that some townsfolk came not for the lash itself, but for the gossip that followed. Did you see how he screamed at the third strike? She fainted before 10, weak blood. The medieval version of reality TV commentary. Of course, things didn't always go as planned. There are tales of executioners who got carried away, striking harder than ordered, leaving victims broken or dead. One record tells of a thief who received so many lashes that his spine was exposed. The town apparently grumbled, not out of pity, but because the show ended too quickly. Imagine that. Disappointed fans at a performance of human suffering. A strange detail lingers in some documents. Occasionally, music was played during floggings. Drums or flutes would accompany the whip's rhythm, turning pain into a grotesque symphony. You imagine the absurdity, someone keeping time with a tambourine while a man's back was flayed. Even in brutality there was showmanship. You watch the condemned sag against the post, their back a canvas of crimson lines. The executioner wipes sweat from his brow, not out of sympathy but because lashes are exhausting work. The crowd begins to drift away, satisfied for now, chattering about tomorrow's chores or next week's fare. The victim is left slumped, rope still tight, head bowed. As you turn away, the echo of the whip follows you, sharper than any bell. You realize flogging wasn't just punishment. It was punctuation, a way for the Middle Ages to underline rules with blood and spectacle, reminding everyone that pain could be delivered as casually as bread at the market. And as the night swallows the sound, you wonder what fresh cruelty waits around the next corner. The crack of the whip still hums in your ears as you drift toward another gathering place. this one larger, grander, almost ceremonial. At the center stands a raised platform draped in heavy cloth. On it rests an axe, its blade gleaming in the torchlight, wide enough to catch the glow of fire like a crescent moon. This isn't a hidden torture chamber, nor a shameful whipping post. No, this is the stage for public beheading, the kind of punishment that carried the weight of finality. The crowd hums with anticipation, but the mood is different this time. Less laughter, more reverence. Children are hushed. Women clutch shawls tighter. Men lean forward with solemn faces. Executions by axe weren't just punishments. They were theater of state, a ritual where law and power displayed their sharpest edge. The condemned is led forward, stumbling on unsteady legs. Their crime is shouted out to the crowd: treason, murder, heresy. Words that hang in the air like thick smoke. You notice the executioner, tall, broad face obscured by a hood. He tests the edge of the axe with his thumb, nods once and then signals. The ritual has begun. The victim kneels, head pressed against a wooden block worn smooth by centuries of use. You hear the hush descend. So complete it feels as though the night itself holds its breath. And then the axe lifts high. For a moment, it gleams above the torches, suspended like justice itself. Then it falls. The sound is not what you expect. Not clean, not cinematic. It's heavy, wet, a thud that makes your stomach twist. Sometimes it takes one blow, but not always. Records speak of botched executions where the axe glanced, hacking through muscle but not spine, forcing the executioner to swing again and again. One noblewoman's death reportedly took 3 strikes, each more clumsy than the last, until the executioner finally seized a dagger to finish the job. The crowd booed, not because of the cruelty, but because the performance was sloppy. Medieval audiences, it seems, demanded precision. Historians still debate whether the executioner's skill mattered more than the axe itself. Some argue the best executioners were highly trained, paid well to ensure swift deaths. Others note that many were simply local butchers, chosen because they owned sharp tools. Imagine being remembered not for your meat pies, but for your messy beheadings. One strange anecdote survives about a condemned scholar who, moments before his execution, promised he would prove the soul lingered after decapitation. When his head was struck off, witnesses swore the eyes blinked 3 times as if in agreement. Another tale tells of a noble who tipped his executioner before kneeling, ensuring a clean cut. "Make it quick," he reportedly said. That's customer service, medieval edition. The crowd reacts with a strange mix of fear and fascination. Some cross themselves, whispering prayers. Others lean in, eager to see if the body twitches or the head rolls dramatically. A child giggles nervously, only to be hushed by his mother. And you stand frozen, caught between horror and the surreal absurdity of people treating this as both tragedy and entertainment. As the executioner lifts the severed head for all to see, the crowd erupts, not in laughter this time, but in cheers, applause, even gasps of awe. It's a finale, the curtain drop of medieval justice. The head is placed on a spike, paraded through the streets or displayed above city gates as a warning to anyone considering the same crime. The message is clear. The state doesn't just punish, it performs. When the crowd finally disperses, the platform remains stained, the block still warm. You step closer, running your fingers over the grooves carved deep by axe after axe. They feel like history itself, etched into wood. Each line a story of someone who once stood where you stand now. And as you walk away into the quiet night, you realize the axe wasn't just a tool of execution. It was a symbol, a reminder that in the Middle Ages power spoke loudly, and its voice was sharp enough to cut through bone. The platform fades into the mist behind you, and the night leads you toward the sound of rushing water. At first you think of riverside mills grinding grain, or children splashing in shallow streams. But as you draw closer, the voices change. They're sharper, more anxious, laced with both excitement and fear. A crowd gathers along the riverbank, torches flickering in the damp breeze. At the center, a wooden beam juts out over the water, ropes dangling. This is no festival, it's a trial by water. And tonight the accused is a supposed witch. She's dragged forward, wrists bound tightly, a coarse rope wound around her waist. The villagers murmur, some spitting insults, others clutching charms against evil. You watch as she's tied firmly, every knot deliberate. A priest mutters prayers, claiming the river itself will decide her guilt. The logic is as twisted as the rope. If she floats, she's guilty, rejected by the water. If she sinks, she's innocent, but drowned anyway. Fairness medieval style. The executioner's helpers shove her into the river. A splash erupts, cold water spraying the nearest onlookers. For a heartbeat, she disappears beneath the surface, hair swirling like dark weeds. Then she bobs back up, gasping for air. The crowd gasps too, then shouts, "Witch!" They claim the river rejects her. Torches flare brighter. Voices rise. You feel the absurdity pressing in. Floating is a death sentence. Sinking is salvation. Either way, the victim loses. Historians still debate whether these trials were truly believed or merely performed for control. Some argue villagers sincerely thought water, a pure element, would reject evil. Others suggest it was simply a theatrical excuse to remove troublesome women, outspoken midwives, widows with property, or anyone who didn't fit. One record even mentions a man accused of witchcraft who was thrown into the water and sank like a stone. The crowd panicked, yanking him out too late. Ironically, he had been innocent, but drowned anyway. Sometimes the ritual included a dunking stool, a kind of seesaw plank that swung the accused repeatedly into the water. So imagine the humiliation, sputtering, soaked, dragged up, gasping, only to be plunged down again. The punishment became a grotesque carnival ride, the crowd laughing as if it were a fairground attraction. In some towns, they even sold food nearby, as if dunking a witch was no different from watching a puppet show. One bizarre story tells of a woman who endured repeated dunkings, each time surfacing with curses on her lips. After hours, exhausted, the townsfolk grew uneasy. Was her survival proof of witchcraft or resilience? In the end, they tied stones to her feet. She sank and the water closed over her for good. You shiver, imagining the silence that followed. The villagers glancing at each other, not quite sure if they'd truly proven anything at all. The river laps at the bank now, deceptively calm as if nothing ever happened. The crowd disperses, some satisfied, others uneasy. The rope floats aimlessly in the current. Empty now, its knot still wet and glistening. You stand watching, realizing that water, the thing meant to cleanse, to give life, was twisted here into a tool of judgment, one that offered no way out. As you step back from the river, the night feels colder. The whisper of water against stone follows you like a voice, reminding you of the cruel logic of the past, that sometimes justice was just an excuse, and truth drowned beneath the surface. The river's chill lingers on your skin as you walk, but the next place you enter is hot, oppressively so. You find yourself in a chamber lit by a blazing furnace, the air thick with smoke and sparks. At first glance, you think it's a smithy, where horseshoes or swords are forged. But then you notice the tools laid out on a table. They're not meant for metal or beasts. They're meant for people. Iron pincers, their jaws heavy and cruel, sit waiting in the glow of the fire. And some of them are already red hot. You hear the hiss as the pincers are pulled from the coals. Sparks dance from their tips, and you can feel the heat even from where you stand. A prisoner is dragged in, wrists bound, eyes darting around the chamber in panic. He begs, he swears innocence, but the guards don't listen. The interrogators nod to each other, lifting the glowing pincers like instruments in some grim orchestra. The first bite lands on flesh, and the scream that follows fills the room. The pincers clamp down, tearing away strips of skin with a sickening rip. The smell is immediate. Burnt hair, charred meat, an odor that clings to the back of your throat. The prisoner thrashes, but every movement only gives the torturers new places to strike. The pincers return to the coals, glowing again, ready for the next bite. It's a cycle. Heat, sear, tear, repeat. Historians debate whether the purpose here was confession or punishment. Some argue it was interrogation, pain used to pry secrets from unwilling lips. Others believe it was purely punitive, a theatrical display meant to horrify anyone watching. Clear, strange detail survives in records. Sometimes the pincers were used on very specific body parts, chosen symbolically. A thief might have flesh torn from his hands, a liar from his tongue or lips. Justice medieval style was nothing if not poetic. One chilling story tells of a man accused of plotting against his lord. He was dragged through the streets, flesh ripped by pincers at every stop until he collapsed. By the end, there was barely enough left of him to bury. Yet the chronicles note the crowd wasn't horrified. They were entertained, cheering each time the glowing iron bit down. Imagine a festival where the main attraction was watching a man unravel piece by piece. You can't help but draw a dark comparison to modern barbecues, where the hiss of meat on a grill makes people salivate. Here the hiss makes your stomach turn. And yet, the executioners worked with the same calm focus as cooks preparing a meal. Heat to the right temperature, clamp firmly, tear cleanly. It was craft as much as cruelty. Some prisoners confessed under this torment, spilling names, lies, or anything that might make it stop. But the irony was bitter. Confessions given under fire were rarely true. One scholar wrote, "The flame burns truth as easily as it burns flesh." And still, the pincers glowed, the cycle repeated, because for those in charge, truth mattered less than obedience. As the victim collapses, their voice hoarse from screaming, the pincers are laid aside, cooling slowly in the air. They sit dark and silent now, looking almost harmless on the table. Tools, nothing more, until the next prisoner arrives. You step back into the night shaken. The air outside feels thin, fragile, almost too clean after what you've just witnessed. And you realize that in the Middle Ages, even the simplest tool, a pair of tongs, could be twisted into an engine of terror. The night seems quieter now, though it's an uneasy kind of silence. You wander through narrow alleys until you find yourself in a small courtyard. At first it looks ordinary. Stone benches, an old fountain trickling faintly, but then you notice the strange objects displayed along a wall. They look like helmets, yet each one is twisted into grotesque shapes. Long noses, animal faces, exaggerated mouths frozen in screams. These are iron masks, and they weren't made for war. They were made for shame. A guard lifts one for you to see. The metal is rough, heavy, with jagged edges that look uncomfortable even before it's worn. Inside there's no padding, no comfort, just cold steel pressing against skin. The condemned is dragged forward, and the mask is forced over their head. The clank of metal echoes as it locks into place, hiding the person's face, erasing their identity. From now on, they're not themselves anymore. They're a caricature, a walking joke for the town. The mask chosen often fit the crime. A gossip might wear one with a long tongue dangling absurdly from the mouth. A drunkard might be given a pig's snout. A woman accused of vanity could be forced into one with mirrors or horns attached. You watch as the condemned stumbles, the mask slipping awkwardly on their shoulders, the weight dragging at their neck. The crowd bursts into laughter, pointing and jeering. The punishment isn't blood, it's humiliation, and yet it wasn't harmless. Some masks were designed with sharp edges inside, cutting into the skin with every movement. Others had spikes pressed against the mouth or tongue, making speech painful or impossible. Imagine trying to clear your throat, only to stab yourself from the inside. Some unlucky souls were left to wear these masks for days, eating and drinking only through tiny holes, their dignity stripped away sip by sip. Historians debate how widespread these masks truly were. Some argue they were common in German towns. Others think they were rare, more symbolic than practical. A few even suggest some of the surviving masks in museums may have been theatrical props later mistaken for punishment devices. But even if only a handful were used, the cruelty speaks volumes. Sometimes humiliation leaves deeper scars than lashes or chains. There's a peculiar story about one man sentenced to wear a donkey mask for mocking his priest. At first, the townsfolk laughed, tossing hay at his feet. But after 3 days, the laughter faded. He couldn't eat properly. His face blistered from the iron's weight, and the stink of rust and sweat clung to him. By the time the mask was removed, he was broken. Not from pain, but from being treated as less than human. You can't help but compare it to modern punishments of public shaming. Social media, perhaps where people wear digital masks of ridicule, mocked by strangers they'll never meet. The medieval version was cruder, but the effect was eerily similar, reducing a person to a symbol, stripping them of identity until only shame remained. The courtyard empties, the laughter dies down, and the condemned stands alone, still trapped in their iron face. You feel a chill run through you, because the mask isn't just a punishment. It's a mirror, reflecting back society's hunger for spectacle. And as you turn away, you realize some prisons don't need walls. They just need eyes that won't stop staring. The echoes of laughter around the masks fade as you walk on, but the weight of shame lingers in your chest. You think nothing could feel worse, until you step into another chamber and find yourself face to face with a device that seems more throne than punishment. It's a chair, broad and heavy, forged from iron. But this isn't a seat of comfort or authority. Beneath it, coals smolder, waiting to be stoked into a fiery bed. This is the red-hot chair, a punishment that turns sitting into an ordeal of fire and flesh. The condemned is brought forward, wrists bound. At first, there's almost a cruel parody to it, inviting someone to take a seat. They're forced down onto the chair, their body pressed against cold iron. But cold never lasts long here. The executioner shovels coals underneath, blowing gently until flames roar to life. The iron begins to glow, first warm, then unbearably hot, heat radiating upward, until the prisoner squirms and writhes, straps holding them in place. The smell comes next, acrid and sickening, as flesh scorches where skin meets metal. It clings to your nostrils, making you want to gag. The victim screams, thrashing, but there's nowhere to go. Every movement only presses them tighter against the burning surface. It's a punishment designed not for speed, but for slow agony. Heat rising inch by inch, turning the chair itself into an executioner. Historians argue about how often this chair was truly used. Some say it was a favored device in certain inquisitorial courts. Others suggest it was more myth than practice, exaggerated in chronicles to frighten would-be heretics. What seems certain is the symbolism: a throne of fire for those who defied authority, a twisted coronation where the only crown was agony. A curious detail emerges in some accounts. The condemned were sometimes oiled before being seated. Officially, it was to cleanse the body. In reality, the oil only ensured that burns came faster, deeper, sealing the skin with each hiss of flame. Imagine knowing every drop poured on you was preparing you to suffer more efficiently. One chilling story tells of a man accused of sorcery who was seated on the iron throne in front of a crowded square. As the flames licked higher, he didn't scream, at least not at first. He smiled, whispering curses until the heat stole his voice. The crowd grew uneasy, murmuring that perhaps the fire fed his magic instead of destroying it. Superstition twisted the scene until even the punishment itself felt dangerous. You can't help but compare it to modern heating pads or electric chairs, comfort and cruelty, born from the same principle of harnessing heat. And in a dark way, the medieval version feels almost theatrical, a stage where the condemned became both actor and victim in a play no one volunteered to watch. Eventually, the victim slumps, their body still strapped upright, the chair glowing faintly in the dark. The executioner rakes out the coals, leaving the iron to cool slowly. When the chamber empties, the chair sits alone, quiet, almost regal in its silence. From a distance, it could pass for an ordinary seat. Up close, it's a monument to suffering, one that blurs the line between justice and cruelty. You step back into the night once more, the cool air a relief against the phantom heat clinging to your skin. And as you walk, you realize that in the Middle Ages, even something as simple as sitting down could be turned into a sentence of fire. The night cools your skin as you step away from the iron chair, but the relief is short-lived. Ahead, another chamber waits, quieter, smaller, almost intimate. There's no towering wheel, no grand stage here, just a wooden bench, ropes dangling from its sides, and at the end a brazier glowing faintly with embers. This is the punishment of burning the feet, a cruelty as focused as it is brutal. The condemned is dragged forward, thrown onto the bench, their arms bound tight. Their ankles are secured so firmly that not even a twitch can escape. You hear the hiss as the brazier is stirred, the embers flaring into life. Torches are pressed close, flames licking the soles of bare feet. At first, the prisoner thrashes, laughter bursting from the crowd at the absurdity of such a vulnerable place being the target. But the laughter dies quickly when the first scream tears the air. The soles of the feet are more delicate than most realize, packed with nerves, tender, unshielded. The fire bites instantly, blistering skin, leaving it raw and red. The smell rises, burnt leather, but you know it isn't leather at all. You feel the prickle along your own feet, as though the flames leap across time to touch you too. Historians still puzzle over this method. Some argue it was favored during interrogations because victims couldn't run or fight, only endure. Others suggest it was symbolic. Feet carried a person through life, so burning them was like erasing their journey. In some chronicles, the punishment ended with the victim crawling, unable to walk ever again, a living warning etched into every staggered step. One chilling record tells of a monk accused of heresy who endured this punishment with eerie silence. His lips moved in prayer as his feet blackened. The crowd whispered that perhaps God protected him, or perhaps the devil numbed his pain. In the end, both theories failed him. When the session ended, he could no longer stand. His journey finished at the very place where he had begun to walk. There were variations too. Sometimes feet were held directly over open flames. Other times red-hot plates or irons were pressed against the soles. In Spain, records mention an inverted brazier, where burning coals were placed beneath the feet, forcing the victim to feel heat rise slowly, excruciatingly, until skin peeled away. It wasn't about killing quickly. It was about stretching every second until the body begged for release. You imagine a modern comparison. People complain when they step barefoot on hot sand at the beach, or scald themselves on a too-warm shower floor. Now multiply that sting by hours with no escape, no cool relief waiting. The joke forms in your mind. At least you wouldn't need pedicures afterward. But it curdles instantly, too grim to laugh at. As the prisoner collapses, their voice gone hoarse from screaming, the guards untie them. They can't walk. They crawl, dragging themselves along the ground, leaving behind a trail not of footprints but of smudges and blood. The crowd murmurs, unsettled. It's one thing to cheer a public spectacle. It's another to watch someone reduced to crawling like a child, broken in the most basic act of being human. The brazier cools, the torches die down, and silence fills the room again. You step back into the night, but every stone beneath your feet suddenly feels hotter, sharper. You realize that in the Middle Ages, even the simple act of walking, something you never think twice about, could be turned into a punishment, a memory of fire that lingered with every step. The night air chills your skin, but your feet still tingle with phantom heat as you follow the sound of bubbling water. At first you imagine a bathhouse, perhaps a pot of soup simmering in a tavern kitchen, but the smell that greets you is not herbs or bread. It's sharper, metallic, heavy with dread. Ahead, in the glow of a dozen torches, stands a massive cauldron. Steam rises in thick clouds, hissing as it spills into the night. The liquid inside churns angrily, and you realize this isn't food. It's punishment. The condemned is dragged forward, shackles clanging against the stones. Their eyes widen as they see the boiling vat. They know what's coming, though hope still flickers. Perhaps a pardon, perhaps mercy. But mercy is not a medieval specialty. The crowd presses closer, faces glowing red from firelight and steam, eager for the next act in this terrible theater. The victim is hoisted by ropes, swung over the cauldron, and lowered slowly. The first contact with the scalding liquid sends a scream ripping through the night. You can almost feel the burn yourself, the way heat sears instantly, blisters rising before the voice even fades. The smell follows, heavy and nauseating, flesh cooking in real time. Some spectators turn away, but most lean forward, their eyes fixed. It's horror and entertainment combined, a feast of cruelty. Historians argue about how common boiling truly was. Some chronicles describe entire sentences carried out this way. Treason punished by oil, murder punished by water, counterfeiters punished by molten lead. Others suggest it was rare, reserved for spectacular crimes that demanded equally spectacular punishments. One king in England even decreed boiling as the official penalty for poisoners. Imagine that. Commit your crime in the kitchen, die in the kitchen. A peculiar detail emerges from records. Sometimes the victim wasn't killed outright. They were dipped in and pulled out again and again like cloth in a dye vat. The process could last for hours, each immersion scalding skin, stripping layers, until the body was little more than raw tissue. You can't help but grimace. Whoever thought of this clearly had too much free time and too little compassion. One grim story tells of a man in France accused of sorcery. He was lowered into boiling oil, and witnesses claimed his screams were so piercing that birds fled from the rooftops. But what unsettled the crowd most wasn't his voice. It was the sight of him still alive after several immersions, his flesh sloughing away while his eyes darted wildly. The executioner finally ended it by pushing him under for good. Even then, the water bubbled for long minutes, as if reluctant to let him go. You can't help but think of modern kitchens again, the sting of steam when you open a pot, the way oil spits angrily from a frying pan. We complain when noodles splash our fingers. They endured full immersion. It's absurd, almost surreal, how the everyday comforts of food and warmth can be twisted into a theater of death. The cauldron bubbles on long after the victim falls silent. Guards stir it with long poles, ensuring the body sinks fully beneath the surface. The crowd drifts away, some laughing nervously, others silent. But the steam clings to you, coating your clothes, sliding into your lungs. You know the smell will follow you long after you leave this place. As you step back into the open air, the cauldron fades into shadow behind you. But the hiss of boiling water still lingers in your ears, whispering a cruel reminder. In the Middle Ages, even the act of cooking could be weaponized, turning nourishment into annihilation. The hiss of the cauldron still clings to your ears as you drift farther from the riverbanks, down into a place where even firelight seems afraid to follow. A heavy door grinds open, and you step inside a stone chamber that swallows sound whole. The air here is thick, stale, tasting of earth and neglect. This is no ordinary dungeon with chains and torches. This is a pit, a hole carved into the ground meant not just to confine but to erase. The condemned is lowered by rope into the darkness. The walls are slick with moisture, slimy to the touch. There is no straw, no bedding, just rock pressing on all sides. When the rope is withdrawn, silence floods back in. The prisoner calls out, but the voice bounces uselessly against the stone, as if the world itself has decided not to listen. Above, the trapdoor closes, and the last shard of light vanishes. Darkness wins. At first you think of it as solitary confinement, a punishment modern prisons still use. But here there's no schedule, no clock, no end date written on a piece of paper. Some were left for days, others for years. Some were simply forgotten. One chronicle tells of a nobleman whose enemies threw him into a pit, then lost interest. When builders opened it decades later, all they found were bones mixed with scraps of rotted clothing. Imagine vanishing from history not with a bang, but with a sigh into stone. Historians still debate whether these pits were built for punishment or for practicality. Some suggest they were simply storage holes repurposed into prisons. Others argue they were deliberate, designed to deprive not only of freedom but of senses themselves. In darkness this total, the mind begins to wander. Hallucinations bloom like fungi in the damp. Every drip of water becomes a phantom voice. Every shuffle of a rat becomes an army marching closer. One particularly unsettling story survives from Italy. A prisoner lowered into a pit insisted he could hear voices whispering his name in the walls. Guards mocked him, until they too swore they heard faint murmurs. Whether it was echoes, imagination, or something stranger, no one ever explained it. Some swore the pits themselves were alive, feeding on despair. And then there was the punishment of standing cells. These pits were too narrow even to sit. Prisoners could only stand, pressed upright until their legs gave out. Imagine being trapped like that for hours, days, maybe weeks. Your muscles trembling, your joints swelling, your body begging for rest, but the pit offered none. Sleep became impossible. Sanity followed close behind. You think of modern complaints, how people curse when Wi-Fi drops out for an hour, or when the lights flicker during a storm. Here darkness wasn't an inconvenience. It was a sentence that stripped away time itself. The silence presses against your ears until you find yourself straining to hear anything at all, a drip, a sigh. Even your own heartbeat feels too loud. And you realize that this punishment wasn't about breaking the body quickly. It was about stretching loneliness into something sharp enough to cut the soul. When the door above finally creaks open again, light pours down like salvation. But for many, that door never opened. The pit simply closed over them, and the world moved on, forgetting they ever existed. You climb back into the cool night, grateful for the breeze, for the stars, for any sign that the world is still wide and alive. Yet the memory of that pit clings to you, because in the Middle Ages, to be thrown into stone and silence wasn't just to be punished, it was to be erased. The night feels almost merciful after the suffocating pit. But your relief doesn't last long. You find yourself in a smaller chamber this time. No grand wheel, no towering cage. Just a table lined with objects that look deceptively modest. At first glance, you might mistake them for carpenter's tools. Wooden screws, iron clamps, small devices that could fit into a traveling chest. But these weren't built to fix chairs or mend doors. These were finger crushers, thumb screws, and nail pincers. Tools designed to pulverize a person one digit at a time. A prisoner is forced onto a stool, wrists shackled. The executioner sets one of the devices on the table, and the crowd leans in with the fascination people usually reserve for card tricks. The tool is placed around a thumb, 2 iron plates joined by a screw. The handle turns slowly. At first, there's only pressure. A wince, the knuckles whitening. Then the screw tightens further, metal biting into flesh, bone straining. A crack echoes faintly and the prisoner howls. You flinch instinctively, your own fingers curling in sympathy. Every turn of the screw feels endless, dragging out pain into slow motion. It's not about spectacle this time. There's no blood spraying, no flames licking high into the air. It's subtler, almost private. But the agony is sharp, precise, concentrated in a single point until it overwhelms the body. Historians argue whether these devices were meant primarily for confessions or simply for cruelty. Some say they were interrogation tools, their pain sharp enough to loosen tongues. Others suggest they were warnings, small enough to be carried from town to town, justice in your pocket. A strange detail emerges in records. Sometimes these devices were used in taverns or local courts without the need for a full executioner. A local judge could tighten a screw just enough to encourage honesty. Imagine ordering ale while someone in the corner is confessing under the crunch of their own knuckles. One particularly odd story tells of a merchant accused of cheating his customers. He was forced into a thumbscrew in front of the very market he'd once thrived in. Each turn of the handle drew jeers from the crowd. Finally, with his thumbs mangled, he admitted guilt. But afterward, his hands were useless, his livelihood gone, his punishment not just pain but permanent ruin. Then there were the nail pincers, heated until glowing, used to tear out fingernails one by one. Records describe prisoners fainting after the first, only to be revived for the next. The crowd didn't always cheer. Sometimes they just watched, grim and silent, as if mesmerized by the cruelty of focusing on something so small, so delicate. The body might endure whips or chains, but who could endure the slow peeling away of every fingertip? You can't help but compare it to modern frustrations. The sting of a paper cut, the irritation of a jammed finger in a door. Those little pains that make us curse loudly, hopping around in frustration. Now multiply that by 10, add iron and fire and stretch it into hours. Suddenly your last paper cut feels like paradise. As the session ends, the prisoner slumps forward, hands ruined, fingers swollen and shattered. They won't be executed today. Their punishment will follow them forever. Every object too heavy, every clasp too painful. Every handshake a reminder of this night. The tools are set aside, cooling, looking deceptively harmless on the table. You shiver, realizing that in the Middle Ages, cruelty didn't always require grand machines or giant stages. Sometimes all it took was a screw and a finger. The sound of splintering bones in crushed fingers follows you as you step into the night again. But the air does not bring comfort. Ahead, a wooden scaffold rises against the sky. From its beams hang iron hooks, curved and glinting in the torchlight. At first, they look like the tools of a butcher's shop, the kind you'd expect to see holding sides of pork. But tonight, they are meant for people. This is the punishment of hanging hooks, suspension by flesh itself. The condemned is dragged forward, chest bare, skin pale in the firelight. The crowd stirs restless. There's no sudden spectacle here, no roaring fire or whipping lash. What's coming is slower, quieter, more dreadful. The executioner tests one of the hooks, tugging on it like a fisherman preparing bait. Then, with calm precision, the hook is driven beneath the skin, slipping between ribs or into the shoulder. The scream that follows is not sharp but guttural, the sound of air forced out by shock. Chains rattle as the rope tightens. The prisoner's body lifts from the ground, swaying slightly as gravity does its work. At first the flesh holds. The condemned writhes, trying to grab at the hook, but every movement tears deeper. You wince as the skin stretches, straining under the weight until it seems it might rip at any second. Historians still debate how often this punishment was truly used. Some argue it was rare, reserved for traitors or enemies meant to be displayed publicly. Others believe it was more common in certain regions, especially as a way to terrify would-be rebels. Either way, the message was clear. The human body could become its own gallows. There are accounts of men hanging for hours, even days, suspended by hooks through flesh that slowly gave way. Some were left to die of thirst, hunger, or shock. Birds circled above, swooping down to peck at exposed wounds. Imagine being both prisoner and feast, your suffering shared with scavengers. One particularly strange story tells of a thief in Eastern Europe who was suspended by his rib cage and survived long enough to sing hymns through the night. Villagers swore his voice echoed across the fields, haunting them long after he finally fell silent. Even today, historians argue whether the tale is true or exaggerated. But the image of a body swaying in the wind, voice trembling through the dark, is hard to shake. The hooks themselves varied in design. Some were sharp and narrow, tearing quickly. Others were thick and rounded, designed to prolong suffering by spreading the weight. Executioners sometimes chose deliberately, depending on whether they wanted a quick end or a drawn-out show. Cruelty here wasn't an accident. It was a decision, sharpened and deliberate. You can't help but think of modern meat markets, where cuts of beef hang from hooks in chilled rooms. Shoppers pass by without flinching, never imagining the same scene played out with human bodies centuries ago. The comparison makes you shift uneasily, as if even now the hooks above you might swing lower. The condemned eventually hangs limp, the hook still holding fast, the crowd dispersing with murmurs of satisfaction. Tomorrow the body may still be here, swaying gently in the morning light. To passers-by, it won't just be a corpse. It will be a warning carved into the skyline. You turn away, but the creak of chains follows you, whispering that in the Middle Ages, even the simple act of hanging wasn't enough. They needed hooks, sharp, merciless hooks, to make sure pain carried weight all the way to the bone. The image of swaying hooks still clings to your mind as you step into another chamber. This one feels smaller, more intimate, almost like a workshop. But the objects on the bench are not tools of craft. They are helmets, thick domes of iron with screws jutting from their sides. At first glance, you might think of armor, something meant to protect. But no knight would ever wear these willingly. These are skull crushers, helmets designed not to shield the head but to squeeze it until bone itself gave way. The condemned is dragged forward, trembling, a rag shoved between their teeth. The iron cap is lowered over their head, fitting snugly like a grotesque crown. You hear the scrape of metal on bone as the screw is tightened, slowly, deliberately. At first, it's just pressure. A headache, perhaps, the kind you get after staring at a candle too long. But with each turn of the screw, the pressure builds. The jaw locks, the teeth grind, and the prisoner's eyes bulge with panic. The sound comes next, a faint creak like timber under strain. Only here, it's bone. The prisoner thrashes, muffled cries vibrating through the gag. The executioner doesn't rush. He turns the screw with the calm patience of a craftsman, each movement precise. This isn't about speed, it's about inevitability. Historians still argue whether these helmets were common or rare curiosities. Some records suggest they were used in inquisitorial courts, where extracting confessions mattered more than preserving lives. Others think they were less about truth and more about performance. The sight of someone's skull deforming in public, a grim reminder of the law's power. A particularly strange anecdote tells of a prisoner who endured the helmet longer than expected. Witnesses claimed blood streamed from his nose and ears, yet he continued to shake his head, refusing to confess. The executioner grew frustrated, tightening further until the skull finally cracked with a sound like breaking pottery. The crowd gasped, not in pity but in awe, as though they had witnessed a macabre magic trick. Sometimes the helmets were designed with spikes inside, pressing into the scalp, gouging deeper with each turn. Others had visors that crushed the jaw specifically, forcing teeth to shatter and tongues to bite through. Imagine every dentist's worst nightmare, multiplied by iron and intent. You can't help but smirk bitterly. Forget braces or root canals. Medieval orthodontics had a very different business model, and yet not all victims died beneath the helmet. Some were released after partial sessions, left with fractured jaws, missing teeth, or permanent migraines. They became walking reminders of the chamber's power, their pain continuing long after the screw stopped turning. The chamber grows quiet when the session ends. The helmet, now streaked with sweat and blood, is removed. It sits heavy on the bench, looking deceptively still like a knight's relic misplaced in time. But you know what it is. A crown of agony, a throne for the head designed not to protect but to destroy. You step back into the night air, grateful for the cool breeze brushing your temple. Even the faint throb of your own heartbeat feels like a blessing. Because in the Middle Ages, your skull wasn't just your shield. It was a target, and the helmet that promised protection could just as easily promise the end. The night air cools against your temples, and for a moment you're grateful. Grateful simply to feel your skull whole, uncrushed. But ahead, the path softens underfoot, turning spongy, wet. The ground sinks slightly with each step, squelching as though it's swallowing you. Torches in the distance reveal a bog, black water shimmering faintly, reeds whispering in the breeze. The crowd has gathered here too, their faces lit in ghostly flickers. Tonight's punishment isn't fire or iron, it's earth itself. The condemned is dragged forward, ropes tied cruelly around their wrists. Their feet sink immediately into the mire, mud pulling like hands eager to claim them. Some villagers mutter prayers, others jeer, but all lean closer to see. This is drowning by bog, suffocation in mud and mire, a punishment as silent as it is final. At first it seems almost slow, almost comical, the way the victim struggles, legs dragging through muck, each movement making the ground cling tighter. The executioners shove, forcing them deeper into the sludge. Mud rises past the ankles, then the knees. The condemned cries out, but the bog swallows the sound, muffling it into gurgles. By the time the chest sinks beneath, panic turns the eyes wide and wild, reflecting torchlight like a trapped animal's. Historians debate how often bog drownings were used. Some suggest they were common in rural regions, where pits and swamps served as ready-made prisons. Others believe they were symbolic punishments, returning traitors or outcasts to the earth. A few even note parallels with ancient rites, where offerings were sunk into marshes to appease restless spirits. Perhaps in a twisted way, these victims were sacrifices, not to gods but to fear. One unsettling record tells of a woman accused of theft who was buried up to her shoulders in mud and left overnight. Villagers reported hearing faint cries until dawn when silence fell. By then, the bog had claimed her completely. Her body was never recovered, only remembered in whispers. The earth itself had erased her, as though she had never existed. The strangest part is how quiet it all is. No screaming flames, no cracking bones, no sharp metallic clang. Just the soft suck of mud, the ripple of dark water, the faint hiss of reeds. Nature itself becomes the executioner, slow and patient, ensuring there is no escape. You shudder, realizing how suffocation here isn't sudden. It's drawn out, every breath clogged with earth, every gasp a mouthful of decay. You can't help but think of modern inconveniences, the annoyance of muddy shoes, the frustration of stepping into a puddle. Now picture that puddle pulling you under, each squelch dragging you closer to silence. A bad day at the park suddenly doesn't sound so bad. The crowd eventually disperses, torches bobbing away, leaving only the bog behind. The water ripples once, then stills, hiding its secret. Tomorrow it will look the same, reeds swaying innocently as though nothing ever happened. And that's the cruelest part. The punishment leaves no monument, no remains, just a whisper of bubbles and the memory of fear. You step back onto firmer ground, the mud sucking reluctantly at your boots as if it doesn't want to let you go. The air feels sharper now, every breath precious, every step solid. And you realize, in the Middle Ages, even the earth itself could be turned into an accomplice. The bog settles behind you with a final gurgle, and soon the squelch of mud gives way to the grind of stone underfoot. Ahead you hear a different rhythm, not screams this time, but the steady thud of hammers striking rock. Sparks flicker in the dark, torches illuminating a quarry cut deep into the hillside. Here, punishment doesn't come with fire or iron spikes. It comes with endless toil, the slow grinding down of body and spirit under forced labor. The condemned are shackled together in chains, their ankles clinking with every dragging step. They carry hammers, picks, baskets, and their shoulders sag with exhaustion. You watch as one man staggers beneath a load of stone so heavy, it seems to bend his spine. A guard lashes out with a whip, not to draw blood, but to keep him moving. In the Middle Ages, hard labor was punishment enough. No need for cages when exhaustion itself became the prison. The quarry echoes with sound, stone splitting, men groaning, tools clanging like bells of despair. Dust fills the air, clinging to lungs until every breath feels like swallowing grit. The prisoners cough, hacking up flecks of stone. You imagine what this does over months, years. Lungs blackened not by coal but by sheer dust. Forget slow execution. This is death by inches. Historians still debate whether forced labor was meant more as punishment or as practicality. Some argue it was about penance, criminals working off their sins through endless toil. Others point out the obvious convenience, cheap manpower for lords who needed quarries mined or roads built. In truth, it was both, a way to control, to humiliate, and to profit, all at once. One strange detail survives in accounts of medieval mines. Prisoners were sometimes chained directly to their tools, ensuring they couldn't run even if they tried. Imagine living your days shackled to a hammer, sleeping beside it, waking only to lift it again. Tools became both lifeline and jailer. And then there were the accidents. Mines collapsed, quarries caved in, men crushed beneath the very stones they were forced to carve. Records describe entire work gangs swallowed by falling rock, their chains rattling uselessly in the rubble. The guards rarely dug them out. After all, there were always more prisoners to replace them. A grim anecdote tells of a nobleman sentenced to hard labor for betraying his king. Accustomed to feasts and silks, he found himself hauling stone beside thieves and beggars. Chroniclers noted his hands blistered and bled within days. His skin burned raw by the sun. He lasted 3 months before collapsing, his body broken not by torture devices but by work itself. The irony was not lost on the townsfolk, the proud lord undone by a shovel. You think about modern complaints, griping over long workdays, sore backs from office chairs, calluses from gym weights. Imagine those complaints multiplied 100-fold, with no end, no choice, and no reward. The medieval quarry was less about building stone walls and more about breaking human ones. As the night deepens, the prisoners keep working, their shadows moving in rhythm like clockwork figures. Their punishment isn't dramatic, not a spectacle to make children gasp. It's quiet, relentless, a punishment that grinds away until nothing is left but dust. You step back from the edge of the quarry, the thud of picks still echoing in your ears. And you realize, in the Middle Ages, cruelty wasn't always about spectacular devices. Sometimes it was as simple as never letting you stop. The clang of hammers fades as you leave the quarry, but the rhythm of exhaustion still beats in your ears. You wander into a quieter square, strangely hushed, as if the town itself holds its breath. Torches line a wooden scaffold, but there are no wheels, no racks, no cages tonight. Instead, on a table lies a long, sharp knife, its blade glinting with unsettling precision. And beside it, strips of pale material. At first you think it's leather, but then your stomach turns. This is flaying, the slow peeling away of skin. Punishment turned into spectacle by stripping the very boundary that makes us human. The condemned is forced onto the platform, wrists and ankles tied so tightly the ropes bite into flesh. The executioner sharpens the blade with calm deliberation, each scrape of stone against metal, sending shivers through the air. Then he begins, not with a quick slash but a small cut at the arm, just enough to lift a corner of skin. The prisoner shrieks, thrashing, but the straps hold firm. Slowly, carefully, the knife travels, peeling flesh back inch by inch, as though unwrapping some grotesque gift. The crowd watches in a silence more chilling than laughter. Some lean in, fascinated, others glance away, muttering prayers. You feel your own skin prickle, as if ready to crawl off your bones in sympathy. The prisoner begs, gasps, then screams again as strips of skin dangle, curling like parchment. Historians debate how widespread flaying truly was. Some claim it was reserved for the gravest crimes: treason, murder of nobles, sacrilege, where the punishment had to be as dramatic as the offense. Others argue many of the stories we read were exaggerated, penned by chroniclers eager to shock. But even if rare, the fact remains: skin was sometimes turned into a canvas of cruelty. One story tells of a corrupt official in Central Asia flayed alive as punishment for extorting peasants. His skin was tanned, then nailed to the judge's chair he once sat on, so that every successor would be literally reminded of justice. It's almost too grotesque to believe, and yet the tale lingers across centuries, half legend, half warning. Another account describes flaying carried out in public squares, with pieces of skin displayed like trophies. Some even claimed that strips of skin were hung at city gates, fluttering like flags in the wind. Whether this was truth or chronicler's flourish, the image is enough to make your stomach knot. And still, a part of you notices the strange poetry. Skin, the barrier between us and the world, used as punishment itself. Remove it and you're not just exposed, you're erased. You can't help but think of modern irritations, sunburns that sting for days, paper cuts that throb endlessly. Painful, yes, but temporary. Now imagine that multiplied, spread across your entire body with no relief, no healing, no escape. Even the thought makes you want to pull your cloak tighter, as if to reassure your own skin it's still safe. As the condemned collapses, voice hoarse, the executioner works with cold efficiency. The strips of flesh are gathered, the scaffold washed with buckets of water, though the stains never truly vanish. The crowd disperses, whispering the story that will echo through taverns and markets for weeks. You step back into the cool air, grateful for the touch of wind against your cheek, a reminder that your own skin is still intact. And you realize in the Middle Ages, punishment wasn't always about ending life quickly. Sometimes it was about peeling it away slowly, until nothing remained but raw memory. The whispers of flayed skin linger like ghosts in your thoughts as you follow the road out of the square. The night feels restless now, the crowd moving ahead of you in anticipation. You soon reach an open field where torches flare high, outlining 4 horses stamping impatiently, their breath steaming in the cold. Heavy ropes stretch from each animal toward the center, where a prisoner lies bound, limbs pulled in 4 directions. You already know what this is. The quartering by horses, one of the most infamous punishments of the Middle Ages. The condemned writhes, but the ropes hold tight. Each wrist, each ankle tied firmly, every knot checked twice. The horses snort and toss their heads, sensing the tension. The crowd presses close, buzzing with both dread and excitement. You can almost feel the silence before the storm, that terrible anticipation of a show about to begin. At the signal, the drivers crack their whips. The horses lunge outward, muscles straining, ropes snapping taut. The prisoner screams, a sound swallowed quickly by the roar of the crowd. At first, the body only stretches, joints wrenching, shoulders and hips pulled to their limits. You wince instinctively, feeling your own limbs ache in sympathy. Then comes the first sickening pop of a dislocation, followed by another. The body arches unnaturally, pulled between beasts too strong to resist. Sometimes, historians note, the horses had to be urged repeatedly, pulling again and again before the body finally tore apart. The process could be agonizingly slow, joints tearing long before flesh gave way. In some accounts, executioners even helped matters along, slicing tendons or cutting flesh mid-process to hasten the spectacle. This wasn't just punishment, it was choreography, a grim ballet performed on the stage of pain. One chronicler describes the execution of a traitor in France who endured multiple pulls before finally breaking apart. The crowd erupted in cheers at the final tear, as though witnessing the climax of a performance. Another story tells of a man who, against all odds, survived the first attempts, his body stretched grotesquely but still clinging to life. The crowd grew uneasy, murmuring that perhaps divine protection shielded him. But the executioners made sure divinity had no chance to intervene. They finished the job with blades. It's hard not to compare this to modern entertainment. Today, people marvel at circus acts, gymnasts, performers who bend and stretch their bodies in ways that seem impossible. Here the stretching wasn't art, it was annihilation. And the applause at the end was just as loud. The symbolism of quartering was clear. Betrayal meant being torn apart, body, name, memory, scattered into pieces so you could never be whole again. Sometimes the parts were displayed separately at city gates, a grisly geography lesson carved from flesh. The message was simple: betray your lord, and your body will mark the map of your shame. As you stand there watching the crowd disperse, the field grows quiet except for the restless stamping of the horses, their work done. The ropes dangle slack now, swaying faintly in the breeze. The executioners drag away what remains, leaving only trampled grass and the echo of screams. You turn away unsettled, because in the Middle Ages, punishment wasn't just about ending a life. It was about making sure that life was pulled apart in every possible way, until nothing remained but pieces scattered to the wind. The field of quartered bodies fades behind you, but the crowd doesn't disperse for long. Instead, they flow back toward the heart of town, voices buzzing, children skipping ahead as though heading to a fair. You follow until you see it, a tall wooden scaffold rising above the square, its beam jutting out against the torchlit sky. A thick rope dangles from it, swaying gently in the wind. The gallows, perhaps the most familiar of medieval punishments and yet no less theatrical for its routine. The condemned is led up the steps, wrists bound, face pale beneath the hood of fear. Below, the crowd murmurs, pressing shoulder to shoulder. Hangings weren't just punishments. They were rituals. The town turned out not because they had to, but because it was the event. An act of civic drama where law spoke with the snap of a rope. The executioner adjusts the noose with practiced hands. Sometimes the knot was placed at the side of the neck, meant to snap the spine quickly. Other times, through ignorance or cruelty, it was left beneath the chin, ensuring a slower death by strangulation. You hear the rope creak as it's tightened, the fibers groaning in anticipation. The condemned tries to speak, a plea, a prayer. But the crowd shouts over them, voices eager for the finale. The trapdoor falls and the body drops. A sharp jerk, the rope quivers, then stills. If the knot was right, the neck breaks instantly. If not, the condemned kicks and writhes, legs thrashing in the air as the crowd watches in uneasy silence. Some gasp, others laugh nervously. Children stare wide-eyed until parents cover their faces too late. And you can't look away. The dance of death swings before you, slow and terrible. Historians still argue about whether hangings were meant to be merciful or deliberately cruel. Some say executioners trained carefully to ensure quick deaths. Others note that botched hangings were common, turning justice into prolonged spectacle. In England, records show people surviving the first attempt only to be hauled up again. Imagine the horror of falling through the trapdoor twice. And then there was the ritual afterward. Bodies often remained hanging for hours, even days, left as grim reminders swaying in the breeze. Crows perched on the beam, tugging at flesh, while passers-by crossed themselves or muttered prayers. Sometimes the corpse was cut down and buried hastily outside consecrated ground, denied the dignity of holy rest. Other times it was displayed longer, an emblem of law hanging over the town like a banner. One strange tale tells of a man hanged for theft, who, when cut down, was found still breathing. The crowd erupted. Some shouted for him to be spared as a sign of divine mercy. Others demanded he be strung up again. The authorities, unwilling to look weak, chose the latter. The poor soul died a second time that day, his miracle extinguished by bureaucracy. You can't help but think of modern stages, spotlights, curtains, audiences hushed for the climax. The scaffold was a stage too, only here the curtain never fell. The performance ended with silence, and the actor never bowed. As the crowd disperses at last, the scaffold remains stark against the stars. The rope swings lazily, creaking faintly as if remembering the weight it bore. You step back into the night, your own neck tingling, aware of how fragile it feels under your touch. And you realize that in the Middle Ages, justice wasn't just about ending a life. It was about doing it publicly, dramatically, and with an audience that would never forget the sound of a rope tightening. The creak of the gallows rope fades behind you, but the crowd's appetite for justice isn't satisfied. Tonight, the punishment is smaller in scale. No scaffold, no horses, no roaring flames. Instead, you enter a courtyard where a handful of townsfolk gather close, their faces lit by lanterns. On a wooden table rests a device that looks deceptively simple, 2 iron clamps connected by a screw, with jagged edges designed for one purpose. Not to break bones, not to burn flesh, but to silence. These are tongue clamps, tools meant to punish speech itself. The condemned is dragged forward, gag removed. Their crime? Words too many, too sharp, too dangerous. Gossiping about nobles, blaspheming against the church, spreading rumors in taverns. In a world where reputation and authority were fragile, a tongue could be as deadly as a blade. And so the punishment struck at its source. The clamp is forced into the mouth, jaws pried open while the crowd leans in with uneasy fascination. The iron grips the tongue, rough teeth digging into the soft flesh. The screw tightens slowly, crushing muscle that once shaped words into lies or insults. The victim gags, eyes wide, as blood seeps along the iron's edge. Each twist of the screw presses deeper, until the tongue swells, turning speech into garbled moans. Sometimes the punishment went further. Executioners heated the clamp before applying it, branding the tongue so that every word afterward carried the sting of fire. Other times the tongue was pierced with spikes, forcing the condemned to drool and choke in public, humiliation layered over pain. And in the most extreme cases, the tongue was cut out entirely, leaving silence as the only confession. Historians still debate how widespread these punishments were. Some argue they were rare, reserved for notorious blasphemers or agitators. Others point to records of scolds' bridles, iron masks with built-in gags that force silence in markets or taverns. The truth may lie somewhere in between, enough to terrify, rare enough to remain legendary. One curious story tells of a town gossip sentenced to wear a clamp while paraded through the square. She had mocked nearly everyone at some point, so when the device silenced her, the villagers jeered, tossing scraps of food at her feet. But the punishment backfired. When the clamp was removed days later, her first words were sharper than ever. aimed at the very judge who sentenced her. She was punished again, this time permanently. A reminder that words once spoken can never be truly chained. You can't help but compare it to modern frustrations, the sting of biting your tongue by accident or burning it on hot soup. Small pains that linger, stealing taste and speech for hours. Now imagine that stretched into days with iron gnawing your flesh and the whole town laughing as you drool and choke. Suddenly a soup burn feels like paradise. As the punishment ends, the clamp is removed. The condemned's tongue is swollen, bleeding, every word reduced to groans. The crowd disperses, satisfied not with blood this time but with silence, and you realize that in the Middle Ages, even your voice could be weaponized against you. Words themselves were crimes, and the punishment was to take away the very tool that made you human. You step back into the night, the air cool against your lips. You whisper to yourself just to feel the words form, grateful for the freedom to speak, because here silence wasn't peace. It was punishment. The courtyard empties behind you, but the echo of muffled cries still clings to the night. You follow the murmur of voices, and soon find yourself in the bustling heart of a market square. By day, this place would smell of bread and spices, filled with merchants calling out their wares. But tonight it hosts a different display. At the center stands a row of small cages, barely large enough for a body to fit. Inside them, prisoners huddle awkwardly, knees pressed to chests, backs bent against iron bars. These are market cages, punishments of humiliation, as public as the gossip that fed them. The crowd mills around, pointing, laughing, tossing scraps of food or rotten vegetables. The prisoners can't swat them away. There's no room to move. Every twitch presses skin against cold iron. You watch one man try to stretch his cramped legs, only to bang his knee against the bars. His groan blends with the crowd's chuckles, a grotesque symphony of pain and amusement. Unlike the wheel or the rack, this isn't about blood. It's about spectacle. The cages are positioned exactly where townsfolk must pass, by the fountain near the bread stalls, beside the path to church. Each passerby sees the prisoners, each glance another lash of shame. Guards don't need to shout the crimes. The display does the talking. Historians still argue about whether these cages were primarily for petty crimes or more serious offenses. Some sources suggest they held drunkards, thieves, or liars, meant to serve as a temporary humiliation before release. Others describe them as holding cells for the condemned awaiting harsher punishments. In either case, the effect was the same. Turn people into exhibits, let shame do the work that chains could not. One story tells of a man who mocked the mayor during a feast. He was stuffed into a cage for 3 days, positioned directly outside the mayor's own house. Each morning, the mayor opened his shutters to see the jester-like figure still crouched there, filthy and sore. It wasn't the whip that broke him. It was being made into scenery. Sometimes the cages were left in the elements for weeks. In summer, prisoners roasted under the sun, their skin blistering. In winter, frost bit into their bones, their breath misting through the bars while snow piled at their feet. There are even records of cages hung from posts, suspended above the ground, so prisoners swayed like grotesque lanterns in the wind. Birds circled, pecking at scraps of food or wounds, turning punishment into a feast. You can't help but think of modern parallels, how people still gawk at mugshots online, laughing at strangers' misery from the comfort of their screens. The cages may be gone, but the impulse to turn shame into entertainment has never really left. The Middle Ages just built theirs in iron and wood. As the night deepens, the market quiets. The crowd disperses, leaving the prisoners still trapped, their eyes dull, their bodies cramped. You hear the faint rattle of iron as one shifts, a sound that blends with the creak of carts and the distant howl of dogs. It's a reminder that here, punishment wasn't always about pain. Sometimes it was about turning you into furniture for the town's amusement. You step away from the square, the cages shrinking behind you, but the image lingers. Because in the Middle Ages, even the simple act of standing in public could become a sentence, your body locked, your dignity sold for the price of a laugh. The market cages fade behind you, their laughter echoing faintly in your ears. But as you walk farther into the outskirts of town, the mood shifts. Here the air is colder, the earth softer, the torches fewer. You find yourself in a field freshly turned, piles of dirt stacked beside wooden coffins and crude shovels. At first it looks like a graveyard preparing for the dead. But then you notice the prisoners, alive, trembling, their eyes darting wildly at the sight of open pits. Tonight's punishment is burial alive. The condemned is dragged to the edge of a hall, wrists bound. Some beg, some scream, others collapse in resigned silence. The crowd gathers close, their faces lit eerily by lanterns. This isn't fiery spectacle or noisy drama. It's quieter, heavier, like watching the earth itself swallow judgment. Guards shove the prisoner into the pit, the thud of their body against soil dull and final. Shovels scrape, dirt cascades down, and the condemned cries out as the ground slowly rises around them. First at their legs, then their chest, then their neck. The voice becomes muffled, panicked, breaking into coughs as dust fills their mouth. The final handfuls of earth pat down against their face, sealing them away in silence. The crowd leans forward, straining to hear if there are still muffled screams beneath the soil. Sometimes there are. Sometimes the ground itself seems to tremble, then still. Historians debate how often this punishment was truly carried out. Some believe it was rare, reserved for heretics or adulterers, its cruelty too great for everyday justice. Others insist it happened more often than records suggest, a form of execution that left little evidence. After all, the earth swallows its secrets well. What is certain is the symbolism, the ultimate erasure, turning a living body into a corpse before its time. One chilling account tells of a woman buried alive for infidelity. Chroniclers claimed she was placed in a coffin with a single candle and left beneath the soil. When her grave was reopened years later during construction, they found scratch marks clawed deep into the wood. The candle had burned down completely, leaving only soot and silence. Another tale speaks of entire groups punished this way, rebels captured after a failed uprising, buried in a trench side by side, their cries blending until the earth consumed them. The chronicler wrote, "The ground groaned for 3 days, though whether it was imagination or memory, no one could say." You think about modern fears, claustrophobia, nightmares of being trapped, the chill that comes when elevators stall. Now imagine that multiplied with no escape, no rescue, just soil pressing tighter, heavier, colder. It's the kind of fear that doesn't just suffocate lungs, it suffocates hope. The crowd begins to disperse, murmuring quietly, as though the earth itself commands silence. The pits are filled, the ground smoothed, leaving no sign but fresh mounds of dirt. Tomorrow they will look like any other graves, indistinguishable from those who died naturally. That's the cruel genius of it. Punishment hidden in plain sight, memory erased beneath the surface. You step back, the earth crunching beneath your boots, and take a deep breath of the open night air. Never has breathing felt so precious, so fragile. Because in the Middle Ages, punishment wasn't always about fire or steel. Sometimes it was about letting the earth itself close over you, sealing away your screams until even silence forgot your name. The fresh mounds of earth linger in your thoughts as you leave the field behind, each step heavier than the last. Soon the road carries you back toward the city walls, where lanterns burn bright over a massive gate. Merchants and travelers stream through by day, but at night it is quieter, except for the figure chained directly to the stone arch. His neck locked in a heavy iron collar, body pressed stiff against the wall, he cannot move an inch. This is the punishment of the neck shackle at the gates, a sentence as public as it is humiliating. The collar is thick, bolted to the wall with iron rings. It forces the condemned to stand upright, their weight dragging on shoulders that ache and tremble. Every breath is shallow, each attempt to shift met with metal biting into skin. The prisoner's wrists hang limp, unable to reach the lock, unable even to scratch an itch. Passers-by stop to point, mutter, or laugh. This punishment isn't about breaking the body in pieces. It's about turning the body into furniture, part of the city itself. By day, the humiliation is worst. Farmers carrying baskets jeer as they pass. Children toss pebbles or stale crusts of bread, giggling at how the prisoner cannot duck or dodge. Travelers pause, curious, asking, "What was his crime?" The guards answer loudly, "Theft, blasphemy, debt." The sentence becomes a story retold by every stranger, passed down like gossip carried on the wind. Historians debate the intent. Some argue neck shackles were temporary punishments, lasting a day or two, enough to humiliate before release. Others note that in some towns, prisoners were left for weeks, their bodies weakening until they collapsed, their necks strangled by their own weight. The truth likely varied, but the effect was always the same. Public shame welded into iron. One odd record tells of a man chained at the gates during winter. Snow fell steadily, burying his feet, icicles forming along the collar itself. When townsfolk passed by the next morning, they claimed he looked like a statue, his body frozen stiff, his eyes glazed in ice. For days afterward, people whispered that the gate had grown its own guardian spirit. Another story describes a woman shackled for gossip, forced to listen to the endless chatter of others as they walked by, repeating the very crime she was accused of. Her punishment wasn't silence. It was hearing her words echoed back until they were no longer her own. You can't help but think of modern equivalents, billboards, posters, even mugshots online, where people's mistakes are displayed for strangers to judge. The medieval shackle just added chains and bruises to the shame. As the night deepens, the prisoner sags, but the collar holds him upright, his chin pressed hard against the iron. He cannot sleep. Every moment is spent fighting gravity. The torchlight flickers across his face, carving shadows into exhausted eyes. Travelers hurry past, pretending not to notice, but the sight will follow them into their dreams. You step through the gate, glancing back once. The figure remains fused to the wall, less a person than a warning carved into the city's very entrance. And you realize, in the Middle Ages, even standing still could become punishment. All it took was a collar, a wall, and a world willing to stare. The iron collar fades behind you, as the night road leads toward the river once again. But this time the crowd is different. Rowdier, more playful, almost festive. Lanterns swing on poles, laughter bounces across the water. And at the edge of the bank stands a strange contraption. A heavy wooden chair fixed to the end of a long beam dangles over the river like a crude seesaw. This is the scold's chair, also called the cucking stool, reserved mostly for women accused of gossiping, nagging, or simply defying men who disliked their voices. The condemned woman is dragged forward, her hair tangled, her wrists bound. She kicks and protests, but the crowd only jeers louder. They strap her tightly to the chair, feet and arms secured so there is no escape. Then, with a theatrical shove, the beam tips downward. The chair plunges into the river with a splash, vanishing beneath the surface. The crowd cheers, children clapping as if at a puppet show. A long moment passes. Just as you wonder if she's drowned already, the beam jerks upward, water streaming from the chair as she gasps for breath. The relief lasts only a heartbeat. With a push, she's dunked again, bubbles rushing up through the dark river. Again and again, up and down like a grotesque carnival ride. Historians argue about the purpose of this punishment. Was it meant to test innocence like witch dunkings? Or was it purely humiliation? A noisy spectacle to silence women deemed troublesome. Some sources suggest it doubled as entertainment, a way for townsfolk to gather and laugh, while authority reminded everyone who truly controlled speech. Others note that the chair was sometimes reserved for men, usually drunkards, but overwhelmingly, it was women who found themselves strapped in. One story tells of a woman in England who endured a dozen dunkings, each time resurfacing with curses pouring from her lips. The crowd grew nervous, muttering that perhaps she really was bewitched, her voice too stubborn to silence. She was eventually freed, but the legend of her resilience outlived her punishment. Sometimes the chair itself was spiked or rough, designed to scrape skin as the victim thrashed. Other times winter added cruelty, plunging someone into an icy river when the banks were already frozen solid. Records tell of women dragged from the water shivering violently, only to be dunked again while the crowd laughed. You can't help but think of modern theme parks, roller coasters, log flumes, water rides where people scream in mock terror, then laugh. Here, the terror was no act. Each dunk was a fight for breath, each gasp a reminder of helplessness. The medieval version of fun carried stakes far higher than a soaked coat. As the crowd finally disperses, the chair is hauled ashore, dripping river water. The condemned slumps in the seat, soaked, humiliated, but alive for now. Guards unstrap her, dragging her away to shivers and whispers that will follow her long after. The river grows quiet again, ripples smoothing as though nothing had happened. You step back into the night, chilled, realizing that in the Middle Ages, punishment wasn't always about breaking bones or spilling blood. Sometimes it was about drowning dignity, again and again until silence seemed safer than breath. The ripples of the river fade as you return toward the town square, following the low hum of voices. Torches blaze again, and this time you see a wooden structure at the center. Two upright posts with a heavy beam across them. Holes cut in the wood wait for hands and a head. This is the pillory, the wooden stocks that turned punishment into a stage where humiliation never ended. until the crowd grew bored. The condemned is led forward, shackles rattling. The executioner lifts the beam, forcing the prisoner's neck and wrists into the cutouts before slamming it shut. The wood locks with a dull thud, pinning them in place. Their back hunches, their shoulders strain, but there's no way out. They are now less a person and more a display, frozen in awkward stillness. The crowd surges closer. Children laugh, pointing at the trapped figure. Merchants throw spoiled fruit, the splat of rotten apples and cabbages leaving stains and stench. One man spits, another slaps the prisoner across the cheek. The stocks don't protect. They expose, leaving the condemned at the mercy of every insult and every hand within reach. Historians still debate whether the pillory was meant more as punishment or as deterrent. Some argue it was humiliation first and foremost, a reminder that reputation was everything in a world built on honor. Others point out that pillories were often placed in markets or churchyards, ensuring the condemned became a living sermon. This could be you. Stranger stories survive too. In some towns, couples caught quarreling were locked in a double pillory together, forced to stand side by side while their neighbors jeered. Imagine bickering with your spouse one moment and the next, being displayed like unwilling street performers. Chroniclers note it sometimes worked. The shame brought reconciliation faster than any priest's sermon, but not everyone survived unscathed. Crowds could grow violent, throwing stones instead of fruit, beating the prisoner until guards stepped in. Some pillories were built with holes for feet as well, forcing the condemned into a crouch so painful that hours felt like torture, and if the sentence stretched into days, hunger, thirst, and exposure did their work, turning humiliation into genuine suffering. You can't help but think of modern echoes, public shaming on screens, where mistakes are frozen in pixels for strangers to mock. The pillory was the medieval version, no delete button, no way to turn your face. Just endless eyes staring, laughing, judging. One peculiar record tells of a poet punished for satire. Villagers pelted him with fruit, but he responded by improvising witty rhymes with every insult hurled. The crowd laughed so hard that they began to cheer instead of jeer, turning his punishment into a performance. He was released early, not out of mercy, but because he made humiliation entertaining enough to satisfy everyone. As the night deepens, the condemned still hangs in the stocks, drool dripping, eyes downcast. The crowd drifts home, leaving only stray cabbages and the faint creak of wood. Tomorrow perhaps someone else will stand here. Tonight the message is clear. In the Middle Ages, even stillness could be turned into a cage, and shame itself became the executioner. The creak of the pillory fades as you wander into another courtyard, this one darker, quieter. The crowd is smaller here, but their faces gleam with anticipation all the same. At the center, a brazier glows with fresh coals, its heat flickering against the night. Resting on its rim are iron rods, their tips glowing orange, shaped into letters and symbols. At first, you might think of a blacksmith's forge, but no horses will be shod tonight. These irons are meant for flesh. This is branding, the punishment that turns skin into a permanent record of shame. The condemned is dragged forward, chest bare, arms bound. The executioner selects one of the irons, holding it aloft for the crowd to see. Sometimes it's the letter T for thief, or B for blasphemer, or even a simple cross to mark disgrace. The branding iron hisses as it's lifted from the coals, sparks trailing in the air. The prisoner thrashes, eyes wide, but there's no escape from the ropes. The iron touches skin with a sharp hiss. Smoke rises instantly, mingling with the scream that bursts from the condemned's throat. The smell of burning flesh fills the courtyard, thick, unmistakable, a scent that lodges itself in your lungs. When the iron is lifted, the mark glows raw and angry, a wound that will never truly heal. The crowd cheers, satisfied that guilt now has a face etched forever into the body. Historians debate how often branding was used as punishment rather than identification. Some argue it was primarily for repeat offenders, ensuring they could never deny their crimes again. Others suggest it was as much about humiliation as practicality, turning people into walking cautionary tales. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The crime didn't just end with the sentence. It followed the body for life. One curious record tells of a man branded as a thief who tried to hide his mark by growing a thick beard. But on market days, people demanded to see beneath it, tugging at his hair until the scars showed. His punishment never ended, long after the pain had faded. Another tale describes branding irons shaped into elaborate patterns, not just letters, but designs. In one German town, counterfeiters were marked with a coin symbol burned into their cheek. In France, deserters from the army bore the fleur-de-lis, ensuring everyone knew their shame. It wasn't enough to punish, you had to advertise the punishment. You can't help but think of modern tattoos, inked voluntarily, worn with pride, each one telling a story. Branding was the opposite. Forced marks of guilt, inked in fire, never chosen, never celebrated. The medieval tattooist didn't ask what design you wanted. He told you what you were. The brazier glows on, irons heating again for the next body. The condemned slumps, the mark searing on their skin, throbbing with each heartbeat. Tomorrow, they'll walk the streets carrying their sentence for all to see. No hiding, no forgetting. A permanent label, burned deeper than reputation alone. As you step back into the night, the cool air brushes your own skin, suddenly precious in its unmarked wholeness. You realize that in the Middle Ages, guilt wasn't just written in books or whispered in courts. It was carved into flesh, glowing long after the fire went out. The faint glow of the branding irons dies behind you, but your skin still tingles as though the heat lingers in the air. You walk deeper into the fortress grounds, and soon you hear the rhythmic creak of wood and rope. In a vaulted chamber stands one of the most infamous instruments of medieval cruelty, the rack. A long wooden frame, wheels at either end, ropes coiled like serpents waiting to strike. It looks almost like a bed, except no one rests here. This is the place where bodies are stretched until they surrender. The condemned is brought forward, wrists and ankles bound with thick ropes. They lie down unwillingly, their back pressed against the frame, staring up at the dark beams above. At first, it might almost feel like restraint, like being tied for safety. But then the executioner turns the wheel, slowly, deliberately. The ropes tighten, pulling limbs outward, tauter and tauter until joints begin to strain. The first sounds are not screams but groans, the body protesting in low guttural tones. You can almost feel it yourself, the ache of a long stretch, the pull of stiff muscles. Except here there is no relief, no release. The wheel keeps turning, joints dislocating with sharp pops, shoulders wrenching free, hips tearing apart. The scream comes then, loud enough to echo off the stone walls, sharp enough to silence the crowd. Historians argue whether the rack was ever truly meant for confession. Some say it was the ultimate interrogation tool. Stretch a body until the truth slips out. Others believe it was a performance, a public reminder of the power held by church or crown. A curious detail survives. Sometimes victims confessed not because of pain, but because their own joints cracked so loudly, they thought their bodies were literally breaking apart forever. One chilling story tells of a scholar accused of heresy. He endured hours on the rack, his arms pulled so far that his body lengthened nearly half a foot. When released, he could never stand upright again, his frame permanently distorted. He became a living warning, proof that the rack did not just punish for an hour. It reshaped a person for life. Sometimes executioners added variations. Weights were tied to the limbs to hasten tearing. Spikes were placed beneath the spine, so that as the body stretched downward, flesh tore upward. In some accounts, the rack was heated with coals beneath the frame, roasting the victim as they screamed. Cruelty here wasn't fixed. It was endlessly creative. You can't help but compare it to modern moments of strain. Yoga poses held too long, muscles aching after a workout, the dull pull of a cramp in the middle of the night. Irritating, painful, but temporary. Now imagine that cramp multiplied 100 times, pulled until tendons snap, then pulled further still. The medieval gym was no place of health. It was a place of unraveling. As the session ends, the prisoner lies limp, arms grotesquely long, joints hanging loose. They aren't dead yet, but they will never walk, never lift, never embrace as they once did. The rack doesn't just break bones, it breaks futures. The chamber falls silent save for the creak of ropes winding slack again. The wooden frame sits still, deceptively harmless, like a bed awaiting its next occupant. You step out into the night, grateful for the strength in your limbs, for the quiet miracle of bending an elbow, of walking upright. And you realize, in the Middle Ages, even the act of stretching could be twisted into a punishment so profound it rewrote the human body itself. The image of the rack lingers. Those limbs stretch past their limits as you step into the next courtyard. Here the stage is simpler. No heavy frames, no iron contraptions. Just a post set upright, ropes coiled at its base, and a bundle of whips hanging neatly as though waiting for their turn. The punishment tonight is one of the oldest and most familiar: flogging. The whip and the scourge, tools that carved law into skin one lash at a time. The condemned is dragged forward, stripped to the waist, wrists bound to the post so that their back arches outward. The crowd gathers quickly, eager for the spectacle. The executioner chooses a whip, a simple leather strap cracked and worn from use. Sometimes it's worse, a scourge tipped with bone or metal designed to tear rather than sting. He unfurls it with a sharp snap that makes the crowd murmur. The prisoner stiffens, bracing for what's to come. The first lash lands with a sound that cuts the night, sharp, fast, cruel. The skin splits instantly, a red welt rising. The second strike crosses the first, the sting blooming into agony. By the third, blood spatters faintly, dotting the ground. The condemned cries out, but the whip doesn't pause. It swings again and again, each strike a punctuation mark in a sentence written in pain. Historians debate whether whipping was meant more as deterrent or as true punishment. Some say it was merciful compared to execution, painful but survivable. Others argue that repeated scourging could be worse than death, leaving scars so deep that the body carried the punishment forever. The lash wasn't just temporary, it was a memory etched into flesh. Records tell of variations across Europe. In some towns, criminals were whipped publicly through the streets, each stop another lash, another jeer from neighbors. In others, the flogging was ceremonial, 40 lashes less one, a number chosen to match biblical precedent. But mercy was often only symbolic. Executioners weren't known for counting carefully. One story tells of a thief who endured his lashes in silence, refusing to cry out. The crowd grew restless, angry that he denied them the satisfaction of screams. So the executioner switched to a scourge with metal tips, tearing flesh until even the strongest will broke. The thief's silence ended in a howl that echoed down every street. The punishment wasn't just about pain. It was about performance. You can't help but think of modern complaints, how people wince at a paper cut, or complain about sunburn across their shoulders. The whip was both of those pains multiplied, repeated, magnified until the body could no longer separate sting from fire. And unlike a paper cut, the scars were permanent, written across the back like a ledger of sin. When the lashes finally stop, the prisoner slumps against the post, blood dripping, back a canvas of raw stripes. The whip coils back into the executioner's hand, quiet again, looking deceptively harmless. The crowd disperses slowly, satisfied not with death but with spectacle. The condemned will live, but every step, every breath, every stretch of fabric across their wounds will remind them of this night. You step away, the sound of lashes still echoing faintly in your ears. The air feels cool against your skin, and you find yourself grateful for its softness, for the absence of fire in every breath. Because in the Middle Ages, punishment didn't always kill. Sometimes it simply followed you forever, etched into your body like a second skin. The sound of lashes still cracks in your memory as you walk farther, but soon it is replaced by the heavy groan of timber, turning in the night. Ahead, in a wide clearing lit by torches, you see one of the most feared devices of all, the breaking wheel. At first glance, it looks harmless, just a massive wooden cartwheel laid flat on a stand. But the ropes, the clubs, and the crowd gathering around tell you this is no cart. It is a stage where bones will be shattered one by one. The condemned is dragged forward, bound tightly, their limbs spread out along the wheel's spokes. They look almost like part of the wheel itself, their body radiating outward, vulnerable, exposed. The executioner approaches with a heavy iron bar, its weight gleaming in the firelight. He lifts it slowly, letting the crowd's anticipation swell. Then, with a brutal swing, he brings it down. The sound is sickening, not sharp like a crack, but heavy, like wood splitting. The prisoner screams, their arm twisted grotesquely where the bone no longer holds true. Another swing, and a leg bends sideways, dangling limp. The process continues, methodical, systematic, arm, leg, arm, leg. The wheel becomes a diagram of suffering, each spoke marked by a break. Historians argue about the exact purpose of the wheel. Some say it was meant for execution, each blow designed to end life through shock and trauma. Others suggest it was punishment drawn out, leaving victims alive but shattered, their broken bodies displayed for hours, even days as crows circled above. A grim detail survives in records. Sometimes executioners showed mercy by delivering a final blow to the chest or head after all the limbs were broken. Other times, mercy never came. One account from Germany tells of a robber who survived 2 full days lashed to the wheel, moaning in agony before death finally claimed him. Villagers brought food and drink to watch, treating his slow demise like a grim fare. Another tale speaks of a man who, even with broken limbs, sang hymns through the night. The crowd murmured that perhaps God had strengthened his voice. Though his body was already ruined beyond repair, the symbolism was clear. Just as a wheel carried burdens across land, so too would it carry the burden of justice across a body. It didn't just kill. It dismantled piece by piece until nothing worked. Nothing held. You can't help but think of modern images of wheels, bicycles spinning, car tires humming along asphalt, carnival rides turning lazily in the sun. All these wheels carry life forward. The medieval wheel carried it to an end, crushing and scattering it like a broken cart left on the roadside. As the executioner finishes, the condemned lies twisted, a grotesque shape stretched across the wheel's spokes. The body is left there, propped high on a post, swaying in the night air. Crows already circle, emboldened by the smell of blood. For travelers tomorrow, this won't just be a corpse. It will be a sign, justice written in bone and timber. You step away unsettled. Because in the Middle Ages, the wheel didn't just turn. It broke everything it touched, leaving only fragments scattered beneath the stars. The wheel fades behind you, its creaks and groans still echoing in your imagination. But the night carries you onward, and soon another sound emerges, a low bubbling, thick and heavy like tar in a pot. You find yourself before a large iron cauldron, flames roaring beneath it. The liquid inside glows faintly in the torchlight, thick, viscous, shimmering with an unnatural gleam. This is not water. It is molten metal, lead or sometimes tar heated until it seethes, ready to devour flesh in an instant. The condemned is dragged forward, their face ghostly pale. They see the pot, smell the bitter smoke, and collapse to their knees. But mercy isn't part of this ritual. Guards force them upright, binding their arms tightly. The crowd leans in, murmuring nervously, equal parts horrified and fascinated. No one turns away, not yet. The executioner lifts a ladle, dipping it into the boiling mass. It rises thick and shimmering, dripping threads of molten death that hiss as they touch the ground. With grim precision, he pours it over the prisoner's head and shoulders. The effect is immediate. The scream, the convulsion, the skin blistering and sloughing away. The smell is unbearable, a blend of smoke, tar, and burning flesh. You gag, covering your mouth, but the crowd only leans closer, transfixed by the horror. Historians argue how often molten punishments were carried out. Some claim they were rare, reserved for spectacular crimes like poisoning, treason, or counterfeiting, acts considered corrosive to the realm itself. Others think many of the accounts were exaggerated, written to frighten more than to record. Still, there are enough records to know it happened, and the imagination fills in the rest. One famous case comes from England in the 16th century, where a man convicted of poisoning was boiled alive in oil by royal decree. Witnesses claimed his screams lasted so long that the crowd grew uneasy, shifting from jeers to silence. The chronicler noted coldly, "So died he, and justice was satisfied." Other times, molten lead was poured directly into the mouth or ears of the condemned, a punishment meant to silence lies or heresy forever. In some tales, even molten glass was used, the shards hardening inside a body twisted in agony. Whether truth or dark embellishment, the message was clear. The body could be turned into a vessel of punishment, filled until it could hold no more. You can't help but think of modern inconveniences, burning your tongue on coffee, spilling hot soup on your lap. Annoying, painful, yes, but nothing compared to liquid fire, poured deliberately onto skin. The medieval cookpot wasn't for stews. It was for turning people into ingredients of fear. As the punishment ends, the condemned slumps forward, smoke still curling faintly from charred flesh. The cauldron bubbles on, indifferent, ready for another victim. The crowd disperses slowly, their faces pale as though they've stared too long into a furnace that reflects their own mortality. You step back into the night, the cool air a blessing against your skin. Even the faintest breeze feels like relief, like salvation. And you realize in the Middle Ages, fire wasn't just warmth. It was judgment, poured molten over body and soul until nothing remained but ash and silence. The hiss of molten metal still curls through your thoughts as you walk on, but soon the sound is replaced by a duller rhythm, iron scraping against stone, clinking in slow, heavy steps. You follow it and find prisoners shuffling through a courtyard, their ankles bound by chains so thick they drag like anchors. Each step is awkward, forced, deliberate. This is no single spectacle, no sudden execution. This is the punishment of lifelong shackles, iron chains that turned every moment into labor. The condemned move slowly, their backs bent under the weight. Some chains are fastened at the waist, dragging behind them like tales of misery. Others lock at the neck, heavy rings that pull shoulders down with every breath. At night, the prisoners sleep in them. By day, they work in them. The punishment is not an event. It is a sentence carried with every heartbeat. You hear the scrape of iron links grinding skin raw at the ankles, see the bruises blooming purple beneath the weight. Some men stumble and fall, but the chains prevent them from rising easily. They crawl struggling, until others lift them back onto their feet. Even dignity is shackled. There is no graceful way to live with iron gnawing at your body. Historians argue whether chains were truly punitive or simply practical, meant to mark criminals while preventing escape. But accounts describe punishments where criminals were deliberately forced to wear the heaviest shackles possible, their bodies breaking under years of burden. Some men's legs bowed permanently. Others developed wounds so deep the iron seemed fused to flesh. One haunting record tells of a debtor in France, condemned to wear a chain until he repaid what he owed, a task impossible in his condition. He died with the chain still on, and it was buried with him, his punishment following him even into the ground. Another story describes a priest accused of heresy, who was forced to wear a collar so heavy he could not lift his head to look at the sky. For years, villagers remembered him shuffling through the streets, always bowed, as though condemned to worship the earth instead of heaven. You can't help but compare it to modern weights. Fitness enthusiasts strapping on ankle weights at the gym, training their bodies through resistance. Here, resistance wasn't choice. It was punishment, not for strength but for humiliation, ensuring every step reminded you of your crime. The clink of chains follows you as you watch the prisoners shuffle into darkness. Their lives are not measured in years but in footsteps, each one marked by iron, and when they finally collapse, the shackles remain cold and indifferent, ready to clasp around the next unlucky neck or ankle. You step back into the night, grateful for the freedom of your stride, for the absence of metal biting into your flesh, because in the Middle Ages, sometimes punishment didn't end in an hour or a day. Sometimes it walked with you forever, link by link, until life itself was nothing but weight. The scrape of chains fades into silence, but the image of bowed necks and bleeding ankles lingers as you follow the flicker of torches into another square. Here a wooden block rests in the center, stained dark from years of use. Around it stand guards holding blades, axes, and even crude shears. The punishment tonight is not death, but something crueler in its permanence: mutilation. The cutting away of ears, noses, or hands, body parts turned into warnings carved in flesh. The condemned is dragged forward, trembling. His crime is read aloud: thievery, blasphemy, deceit. The crowd listens with eager anticipation, their eyes fixed not on his face but on the tools waiting. Guards force him to kneel, pressing his cheek to the block. With a swift movement, one ear is seized and sliced clean off. The man screams, blood streaking down his neck, and the crowd erupts in shouts. Some cheer, others wince, but no one turns away. The missing ear says more than any written decree ever could. This man has stolen, and now everyone will know it. Sometimes it wasn't the ear but the nose, lopped off in a single stroke. Or a hand severed at the wrist, the stump wrapped in rags while the crowd jeered. Historians note how symbolic these choices were. Steal with your hand, lose it. Lie with your mouth, lose your tongue. Gossip with your ears, lose them. Justice was as much theater as it was law, and every cut carried a moral etched in blood. Records tell of towns where mutilated criminals became walking lessons. A man missing both ears would be known instantly as a repeat offender. A woman without a nose was shunned, her face itself a mask of punishment. Unlike a scar that could be explained, these wounds screamed a story everyone already knew. One chilling account describes a counterfeiter branded and mutilated on the same day, his right hand severed, then nailed above the city gate with a sign reading, "This hand made false coins." For months, travelers entered beneath the grisly reminder, each one glancing up to see justice quite literally hanging over them. There are even tales of mutilations performed with grim creativity. In some places, the ears or noses cut off were hung around the condemned's neck as they were paraded through the streets. Others were forced to carry their own severed hand, clutching it against their chest as they stumbled home. The cruelty wasn't just in the act, it was in the spectacle afterward. You can't help but compare it to modern marks of shame, criminal records, mugshots online, reputations stained forever. Those are invisible scars, words on paper, or pixels on screens. In the Middle Ages, scars were carved in bone and flesh, impossible to hide, impossible to forget. As the executioner wipes his blade clean, the condemned staggers away, clutching the space where his ear once was. He is alive, yes, but altered forever, a living warning with every step. The block sits quietly again, waiting for the next body, the next cut, the next story to be written in flesh. You step back into the night, grateful for the wholeness of your own body, the soft brush of your ears, the simple flex of your hands. Because in the Middle Ages, punishment didn't always end your life. Sometimes it marked you so the whole world could read your sins at a glance. The memory of severed hands and ears still stings as you follow the glow of fire deeper into the night. But this time the blaze is larger, higher, roaring against the sky. In the center of a wide square stands a tall wooden stake, surrounded by bundles of dry kindling stacked waist-high. The air is thick with smoke and anticipation. This is one of the most infamous punishments of all, execution by fire. The condemned is brought forward, ropes binding their arms tightly to their sides. Their eyes dart wildly at the flames already licking the wood. The crowd presses in close, faces lit orange by the rising firelight. Children perch on shoulders, eager for a clear view as though watching some grand festival. Tonight the town is united not in prayer or feast, but in watching a body become ash. The executioner circles the stake, tying ropes around the prisoner's waist and chest, ensuring there will be no escape. Sometimes a chain is added, cold and heavy, because wood burns but iron does not. When the preparations are finished, the torch is brought forward. For a moment everything is silent. The condemned whispers a prayer, the crowd holds its breath. Then the torch lowers, and the kindling flares to life. At first it is only smoke, choking, blinding, searing the lungs before the flames even touch skin. Then the fire climbs higher, wrapping around the body. Screams erupt, piercing and raw, carried on the wind for all to hear. Some victims begged, others cursed. Some even sang hymns until their voices cracked. The fire consumed them all the same. Historians debate whether burning at the stake was meant more as execution or as ritual. For heresy, it symbolized purification, the fire cleansing a soul deemed tainted. For witchcraft, it was destruction, a community purging its fear by watching one body burn. And always it was public, because fear spreads faster when everyone can see the flames. There are strange, unsettling details in the records. Sometimes damp wood was used to prolong the suffering, ensuring more smoke and slower flames. Other times, executioners tied bags of gunpowder around the condemned's neck, creating a sudden explosion that ended things faster. A small mercy wrapped in violence. One grim story tells of a woman accused of witchcraft who endured so long in the flames that the crowd grew restless. The fire had burned her bonds away, and for a moment she stood free in the inferno, arms lifted, before collapsing in the coals. Chroniclers wrote that villagers never forgot the sight, some swearing they saw her spirit rise with the smoke. You can't help but compare it to modern comforts, the warmth of a campfire, the glow of candles, the crackle of a fireplace on a winter night. Fire is meant for safety, for light, for gathering. Here it was turned into a weapon, a spectacle, a sermon preached in smoke and ash. As the fire burns down, the crowd begins to drift away, leaving only embers glowing red in the dark. The stake remains blackened, twisted, a monument to fear. In the morning, the ashes will scatter, but the story will remain, carried from village to village as a warning. You step back into the cool night air, every breath a relief after the suffocating smoke. And you realize in the Middle Ages, fire wasn't just survival, it was judgment. And the flames licked not only bodies but entire communities, searing memory into their bones. The smoke of the stake drifts behind you, and for a long moment the night feels strangely quiet, as though the world itself has run out of cruelty. But then you hear it, The heavy thud of wood on wood, the scrape of an axe being lifted. Ahead lies the final stage, one of the oldest punishments of all, beheading. Not with the clean precision of the guillotine, which would come centuries later, but with crude axes and swords, wielded by hands that were sometimes steady, and sometimes not. The condemned is led forward, their arms bound, their face pale but resigned. Some walk bravely, others stumble, but all kneel before the block. The wood is stained dark from those who knelt before, grooves carved by countless blows. The executioner steps up, broad-shouldered, holding an axe that glints in the torchlight. He rests the blade on his shoulder as the crowd hushes. A single swing is expected, hoped for, but in truth it is not always so simple. The axe rises, then falls. Sometimes the head parts cleanly, rolling into a basket with a thud. The crowd gasps, then exhales as though a play has ended. But other times the blow lands badly, striking bone, glancing off muscle. The condemned screams, the crowd shifts uneasily, and the executioner must swing again. And sometimes again. The horror is not just in the death, but in its fumbling. A ritual meant to end swiftly becomes a drawn-out performance of pain. Historians note that in many places, the skill of the headsman was crucial. Some trained carefully, ensuring a single blow. Others, less skilled, turned the scaffold into chaos. Records describe nobles bribing their executioners to make it clean, offering gold for a sure hand. One tale tells of a condemned man who forgave his executioner in advance, whispering, "Do your best." It was the last act of mercy he would ever give. There are strange accounts, too, of heads that seemed to move after severing, lips that whispered prayers, eyes that blinked as if refusing to let go. Chroniclers argued over whether these were miracles, illusions, or simply the twitch of muscles. The debate lingers even now, a reminder of how thin the line is between life and death. You can't help but compare it to modern ideas of endings, clean, clinical, hidden behind closed doors. Here death was a stage, an event shared by all. The block was not just wood. It was a podium where the body became both sermon and warning. The executioner wipes his axe, the crowd begins to scatter, and the square falls silent. Only the block remains, waiting for another neck, another story. You stand there listening to the hush, realizing you've walked through fire, iron, rope, and water, through every cruelty the Middle Ages could muster. And now, at last, the journey begins to soften. The torches burn lower, the echoes grow faint, the horrors blur at the edges, no longer sharp but hazy, like dreams slipping away. You breathe deeper, slower, the night air cool and steady in your lungs. The stones beneath your feet no longer feel cold, only grounding. The voices of crowds fade to whispers, then to nothing. The images of racks, wheels, flames, and chains drift like smoke dissolving into the stars. What remains is quiet, a quiet so deep it feels like safety. You lie back in your mind's eye, the sky overhead wide and endless. The punishments of the past sink into shadow, leaving only the present, the soft rustle of fabric, the steady rhythm of breath, the calm weight of rest. The story closes, not with fire or iron, but with stillness. A stillness that wraps around you like a blanket, reminding you that here in this moment you are untouched, unmarked, whole. Now, let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the cruel echoes of history drift away, replaced by silence, by warmth, by peace. You've walked the long road of punishment, but now it ends not in pain but in rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.